Chris, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay.
So Matt and Tom, if you could unmute.
Done. Yep.
Just let me know when you're ready, Gail.
I'm ready.
Oh, I'm sorry. I call to order the virtual regular meeting of the Oak Park and River Forest High School on April 23rd, 2020 at 6:32 p.m. and ask for a roll call.
Mr. Kofsky?
Here.
Ms. Bivey?
Here.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Mr. Isley?
Here.
Mr. Martiri?
Here.
Ms. Harris?
Here.
And Dr. Moore?
Here.
Thank you.
Now I move to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district and independent contractors and specific volunteers, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity, student disciplinary cases, and ask for a second.
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 Ms. Bivey?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Mr. Martiri? Mr. Martiri? Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Kofsky?
Yes.
Dr. Moore?
Yes.
And did I hear Mr. Martiri?
Wonder if he's muted.
You might be muted.
I don't see him on the list of panelists
Oh.
at the moment.
Maybe he already went to the closed session room.
He might have, because he was here.
Yeah, okay, all right, okay.
So we will reconvene in the other space.
Right, and that's the second link in your email.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm ready as well. Yep.
Was that Gail? Because that's the main one.
Couldn't tell. Gail, are you ready?
I'm sorry, that was me. I responded yes, thank you.
Okay. We will learn each other's voices. Okay, so we will resume open session and reconvene open session. And the first item, let's see, is the hearing for the driver ed waiver request. And at 7:30 p.m., I call this virtual public hearing to order for the renewal of the application for modification of driver education fee waiver. Notice of this virtual public hearing has been posted on the district's website since April 9th, 2020. And the notice was also published in the Wednesday Journal on April 15th, 2020 to allow public comments to be submitted via a survey link. At this time, written comments submitted via the survey link will be read. Are there any?
No, there are none for this one. Nothing was received.
Okay. So at 7:39 p.m., I'm now closing the hearing. And are there any public comments regarding the driver's education waiver?
There is something else for you to read. We're opening the second hearing.
Yeah, that's for the behind the wheel fee increase. So there are no public comments about the fee waiver?
I think you have to read the
Okay, I'm just going by the
Oh,
Okay, so I will go to the next one. Hearing.
No,
for-
there were none for that. I thought I said that. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. Call this virtual public hearing to order on Thursday, April 23rd, 2020 for an increase in the driver's ed, behind the wheel student fee to $250. Notice of this virtual public hearing has been posted on the district's website since April 9th, 2020. And the notice was published in the Wednesday Journal on April 15th, 2020 to allow public comments to be submitted via a survey link. At this time, written comments submitted via the survey will be read.
And I do have one
Okay.
from Abby Perry, who said she believed that the driver's ed fee should either stay the same or be reduced or removed entirely. Her reasoning was that the residents in Oak Park and River Forest already pay high taxes for a free and appropriate education, especially for low-income families or anyone recovering financially from the COVID-19 pandemic. Having a school-provided class as the cheapest option would lessen the burden of preparing their child for the outside world. Also, many students may find it much harder to get their license after they move away to college. Starting the process in high school for free would make it easier for students to receive their license before they move away, and it becomes more difficult. My final statement is that if driver's ed or even just safety ed is a required course to graduate, it should be free and is part of a free and appropriate education. That's all.
So at 7:41 p.m., I'm now closing the hearing. And next are introductory reports.
There was one FOIA report and it was resolved.
thank you.
Okay, and public comments.
Yes. Just a moment. This is the statement is, I appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts about the canceled Italian trip. My son, who studies Latin, was thrilled when the opportunity to join the Italian exchange trip opened up. He taught himself rudimentary Italian this summer. He made a video introducing himself to the Italian students. He eagerly viewed the response videos from the Italian students. He made friends with his exchange student. He returned from planning meetings excited about the itinerary and cultural opportunities, and he was crushed when the trip was canceled. For our family, this may have been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The school trips have proven to be the only door to international travel that we have been able to open for our children. We are so fortunate that the district has offered these travel experiences. They are a welcome extension of the curriculum and an invaluable learning experience. While countless concerns have been expressed about ACIS, the company selected to arrange the travel to Italy, using a service like ACIS surely facilitated much of the itinerary and made many of the logistics of international group travel possible in the first instance. Dr. Pruitt-Adams indicated reconsidering how trips are run based on this year's experience, and she expressed no opinion one way or the other on whether to work with any travel company, as she was sure all group travel companies operate in the same manner. She continued that I do strongly encourage the board and administration to figure out some way to continue to make these travel opportunities available for our kids. I reiterate how much they mean to families like ours. As far as the canceled trip is concerned, many of our kids worked hard to finance the trip for themselves. There's no means for them to recoup the lost experience. There is no means for them to recoup the $1,000 that was forfeited with the cancellation of the trip. The kids have no chance at a different outcome here. They are in no way responsible for the situation, yet are bearing all of the burden. I would direct you to the news reports of canceled trips for Chicago Public Schools high school students. As reported in the Chicago Sun-Times on March 12th, CPS stated it would make the students whole and would reimburse students for out-of-pocket costs. I hope this board considers showing the same level of support for our children. I also want to publicly commend Dr. Pruitt-Adams for her efforts to communicate with the parents involved in the situation, Ms. Johnson for her work to obtain information about ACIS, and Ms. Bellarto for her extensive efforts planning a trip that sounded so great. Its loss is still being felt in our house. That's all.
Oh, okay. All righty. So we are at, our consent items. Are there any consent items anyone wants pulled for individual consideration? Okay, so I will move for approval of the following consent items. A, check disbursements and financial resolutions dated April 23rd, 2020.
Sorry, Jackie, I couldn't
Yes.
be quick enough. I apologize. Item
Okay.
E is, item E, I would ask that we pull, please.
Okay. B, monthly treasurer's report. C, monthly financials. D, application to ISB for renewal of previously approved waiver modifications of ISB administrative rules and/or school code mandates regarding driver education fee. Application for waiver or modification of state board rules and/or school code mandates. F, Northern Illinois Independent Purchasing Cooperative Beverage and Equipment RFP. G, food service intergovernmental agreement with District 97 for 2020-2021. H, Board of Education budget for 2020-2021. I, policy for second reading. A, policy 2105, ethics and gift ban. And J, open and closed minutes of February 27th, March 19th, and April 14th, 2020, and a declaration that the closed session audio tapes of August 2018 shall be destroyed, and ask for a second.
Second.
And a roll call.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Martiri?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
And Mr. Kofsky?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. And now I will move to approve the driver ed behind the wheel student fee increase and ask for a second.
Second.
And Matt, you had discussion?
Yeah, just to reiterate what I've said in the past, I just am not in support of this fee increase, so I'll just keep it that simple. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
I just want to clarify a couple points just relevant to the note earlier. And they are, one, that the behind the wheel is not a mandatory class. That's correct, or can I validate that? Two, that our free and reduced lunch do not have to pay that fee. Can I just make sure that's indeed the case?
Ms. Sador? Cindy? Cindy? Is Cindy on the call?
She is on the call. It looks like she might be having trouble unmuting.
Hold on.
Cindy, I see you unmuted. Could you try talking?
Linda Parker said that her understanding is that only the classroom portion of driver's ed is required. but I'm trying to reach Cindy. Cindy,
Yes, can you hear me?
through my phone. Can you hear her through my phone, everyone?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Cindy, there was a question. Did you hear the question? And Linda
can't hear
Parker
now, Joanne.
sent a, say that again? Linda Parker,
I'm sorry, Dr. Pruitt Adams, I couldn't hear anything she said. I only heard her when she said, "Can you hear me?" And then after that, I couldn't.
oh,
Yeah.
what she said was that, Cindy, tell me and I'll tell them.
Yes, Joanne. The free is free, and the reduced pay 10% would be $25.
The reduced is, the free and reduced, the free kids are free, the reduced kids pay $25.
Thank you.
And Linda Parker said it's her understanding only the classroom portion is required by state law. I think we need to also check that because the in-car part was suspended during the school closure time. Greg, would you know if that requirement, the 30 hours of in-seat, is that state required?
In order to get a license, it is, but it is not linked to graduation requirements. And so we do allow students to pick up their behind the wheel credits by alternate means in order to get their license. That is not something that every kid has to go through in order to get their diploma at OPRF.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Stay on my phone.
Okay. So we can call for the vote.
No, I don't. Can you hear?
Gail,
Yes.
we're ready.
Yes, it is. Mr. Barron,
No.
Mr. Isley,
Yes.
Mr. Martiri,
Yes.
Ms. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Kowski,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
and Dr. Moore.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. And now we are at our action items, and our first is, wait, you don't have to vote on a presentation.
This one is, we're asking the board to take an action at the conclusion.
Oh, I see, present. So,
The presentation is separate. They're gonna give you the insight.
but we're not gonna have the presentation prior to the motion? Okay. Move to approve the request, recommendation for possible financial impact due to COVID-19 and ask for a second.
Second.
Now we will have the presentation.
Right. So I'll start and then Dr. Grossi can take over. Out of concern for the growing, concern is growing in the state of Illinois due to financial conditions, which will be devastated by the economic downturn caused by the coronavirus. We felt it important tonight as an administration to have the discussion with the Board of Education regarding specific concerns that we have. Making the presentation tonight regarding those concerns will be Dr. Robert Grossi, talking about the concerns he shared with Ms. Sador. At the conclusion of the presentation, we would ask the board, in consideration of the new financial threats that face the school district and the board policy on fund balance reserves, the administration recommends that the Board of Education approve postponing the impending construction project 1 2020 scope, demo of the South Cafeteria, construction of South Cafeteria and Student Resource Center, demo and rebuild of the driver's ed duplicating mailroom to a date that is to be further determined. This item is in compliance with Strategic Plan Priority 4, Facilities, Operations, and Finance, and Board Policy 4:10 and 4:20. Dr. Grossi and Ms. Sador.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
A little
It's good to-
louder, though. Yeah, Rob,
Sure.
a little loud.
Okay, it's good to see everybody sort of again. I think it's very critical for school districts, especially those in the process of major financial decisions, such as construction projects and collective bargaining agreements, to consider the potential impact of COVID-19 on the long-term financial condition of the school districts. I'm very concerned and focused on this issue primarily because of my concerns about the financial condition of the state of Illinois. I view the state of Illinois I view as an elderly person with many pre-existing conditions and their vulnerability to this crisis. I think that the state of Illinois put itself in a tough spot to not absorb something like this. And I think that there could be some significant ramifications that could feed down to school districts, and in particular, as I'll go through this, Oak Park River Forest High School. Can we go to slide 3, please? Just 5 major points I want to make regarding the pre-existing conditions before the COVID-19 crisis hit Illinois. Just prior to that time, the state of Illinois had $7.6 billion of outstanding bills in backlog. There was $137 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. The state of Illinois had 21 rating downgrades since 2019, and it has the lowest credit rating of any state in the United States. And the state of Illinois has no rainy day fund, no preparation, or nothing in reserves to take care of a situation like this. So prior to this event, this was the condition of the state of Illinois. If you turn to the next slide, please. So how will the COVID-19 pandemic impact the financial conditions of the state? Obviously, nobody knows, but the governor's office themselves are projecting a budget gap now of $2.7 billion this year as a result of the economic impact of the crisis. And they're projecting a staggering budget hole of $7.4 billion in FY21 due to the coronavirus. A very important point is that Standard & Poor's, which is a rating agency that rates the credit quality of entities that issue debt, gives at least a 1 in 3 chance of lowering the state's credit rating to junk. That's a very significant event if that happens, because a lot of the buyers that lend the state money through purchasing their debt have criteria that they can only buy investment grade quality bonds. So if in fact the state of Illinois turns to junk, that's going to either result in a very high cost of borrowing for the state, or even potentially an inability to effectively get into the credit markets. So the state of Illinois, generally speaking, whenever the major rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, have expressed concerns like that, the state of Illinois listens. And more than likely, the state of Illinois is going to do what it has to in order to maintain a credit rating that's considered investment grade. Next slide, please. So there's 6 primary ways I think that this crisis could impact school funding in Illinois. First of all, I believe that the passage of a property tax freeze becomes more probable. I think that legislators will have a very strong incentive to pass legislation, given the fact that many of their constituents are unemployed now and have lost, portions of their investment portfolios, to provide some relief to them in the form of a property tax freeze. So I think that the probability of a property tax freeze will be higher as a result of this. And it probably was pretty high even before this, as the governor was linking a property tax freeze to his progressive income tax proposal. Secondly, is that evidence-based, not on the same slide, please. Evidence-based funding dollars may decrease And this is very relevant to Oak Park River Forest because the way the formula works is that if there is a decrease in evidence-based funding, which many people are suggesting may happen, the first monies they take away are the growth that school districts received in Tier 4 districts and Tier 3 districts. And if you recall, your district received growth of $3.8 million as a result of the property tax relief grant. So it appears that if the state does cut evidence-based funding at almost any level, your district will lose that $3.8 million of annual revenues. The third possible impact is a pension shift to schools. And the rating agencies are very strong on the state doing this. The state pays about $1 billion a year in normal pension costs. And so the question would be, if the state of Illinois had to cut $1 billion, would it be optically better if they cut evidence-based funding by $1 billion, or if they just shifted pension to school districts? I don't necessarily think that both will happen in the next couple of years, but I think there's a very good probability that the district will be facing one of those two things from the state, and potentially a property tax freeze to go along with it. And then the fourth, fifth, and sixth things that will have some impact is that, and it depends more on the community, but it's very likely that property tax collection percentages will decrease in some of the poor areas and the areas where businesses are leaving. There's a grace period for people to not be kicked out of their house for non-payments. And I think that could lead to tax collections. And also, because the county of Cook has decided to assess all of Cook County this year because of this crisis, I think that there'll be a spike in property tax appeals as well. The sixth thing is property tax bills may be delayed. That doesn't impact your district that much because you have cash flow. The only impact that would be is that you would lose interest earnings. Next slide, please. So over the short term, this year, more than likely, the financial condition of the district should be better than budget, because the cost of providing education with the students and the staff out of the building generally will be lower than if everybody was in the facilities. Now, the district may incur some delay in grant revenues. The district has only received the state of Illinois has only dispersed to school districts one of the 4 categorical payments so far this year. And some of the mandates coming up by the governor's office, because they're running out of liquidity, is to only disperse funds that are critical and save the funds for those events. So I don't know what that means in terms of grants, but that may offset some of the savings that we may generate from expenditure reductions. And then for next year, the property, if there is a property tax freeze, it will not hit your next year's budget. And this is just instinct, but my guess would be that, so first of all, the state of Illinois is going to absolutely need a federal bailout. Without a federal bailout, I think that they're done. And huge things would happen as a result of that. I think that if they do get a bailout, my guess would be that part of that money will be used to shore up evidence-based funding for next year. But then after the one-time bailout, the state is still going to have a huge structural deficit that they're going to have to figure out ways to get rid of, either by shifting pensions, distributing less money to school districts, or doing other things. I do think that starting next year, your fall tax collections, it's very possible that your tax collection percentages may be down somewhat as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So in terms of quantitating or quantifying the estimated impact of these 3 primary events, again, if the district loses, if evidence-based funding is cut, it's very likely that the district will lose $3.7 million every year in perpetuity. If there's a property tax freeze, I'm projecting these types of losses versus if there was an increase, if you were able to increase by CPI. And in terms of the pension shift, and I don't know how it would end up looking like, but under the assumption that they start shifting 1% of credible earnings into your district every year and phase it in over 9-10 years, then that would be the impact on the pension shift. So if those three things happen, we're talking about a cumulative impact to your district, which was not anticipated 6 months ago, of in excess of $40 million. And that's why it's important, I think, for the school district to just kind of take a look at that. The district has done a good job, as you'll see in the next couple slides, of putting itself in a good financial position and spending within its means, but there's potentially going to be some very challenging times ahead. Next slide, please. So what we did is Elisa, Cindy, and Mike and I, this slide represents projected revenues versus expenditures, all funds. And the next slide will show everything, but we excluded, for purposes of illustration, all capital projects, all building maintenance work, and all life safety work, which the district generally spends about $6 million a year on. So if you took away those $6 million and look at the green line, you could see that we were projecting surpluses all the way through the projection period, which takes us out through fiscal year 2025. If we lose evidence-based funding money, you could see essentially that green line drops by about $3.6, $3.7 million a year. And if we get both the evidence-based funding loss and a tax freeze, which I definitely consider a possibility, you could see that we would have some very significant deficits. And again, this doesn't factor any dollars going into maintaining the district's, not even talking about project one, but in maintaining the building at all. Next slide, please. So this slide adds what we're calling non-discretionary construction, which the definition is below. I can't see it on the screen, or does it even show on your screen? Yeah, so non-discretionary these are costs related to your 10-year maintenance plan through 2025, which costs out at $30.9 million, including this year, and life safety of $5.1 million, which is about $36 million. So over the 6 years, it averages about $6 million. So I did a smooth line average to avoid anomalies, but essentially you could see what happens is that even with the COVID-19 impact, we were going to have, again, scheduled deficits, anticipated deficits to address capital projects. But you could see that with the loss of evidence-based funding model, we start having some fairly decent deficits. And if we had both the loss of evidence-based funding and the tax freeze, and we're spending $6 million a year in these types of projects, you could see that the deficit would become unsustainable at some point in time. Next slide, please. So this graph represents what would happen under the three scenarios if we include the non-discretionary construction, which is $6 million a year, and project one. So looking at the green bars, and the dotted lines represent the district's fund balance policy of 25% to 75% of trying to keep fund balances within there. So recognize in 2019 that the district was above those ranges, and that's part of the reason why the district decided to move forward with using fund balance reserves to address critical needs in the building. And if you look at the green bar, you could see that the district was able to easily address those capital project one and stay within that 25% to 75% range. If you do have a loss in evidence-based funding, that's the red bars, you could see that even under that scenario, although the district would have some fairly large deficits by 2025, you would be able to, based on the projections, get through fiscal year 2025, which is a little over 5 more years, and be able to do that and address your your project one and still be within that 25 to 75% range. However, if you do get hit with both the loss of evidence-based funding and the tax freeze, and you decide to continue with project one, you could see that your fund balances would be below your 25% target. And if you recall, if you went back to the previous slide, we don't have to do that, but you could see that you had a projected deficit in excess of $10 million. So the district would be in a situation where it would be considered a very critical financial position that it doesn't want to get into, where the structural deficit to provide education would cause the district running out of money very shortly after that 2025 period. Next slide, please. So the district, I personally am not coming into this with a recommendation, but to kind of provide information to the stakeholders, the decision makers, just to make sure that they want to proceed as anticipated. So the way I see it is you have three basic options. One is to maintain the current plan of action and start work this summer using fund balance reserves to fund all of project one. The second option would be to pause project decisions until the economic impact over COVID-19 crisis can be better assessed. Presumably, if the board decided to do that, and we're saying let's try to wait let's say they went that direction, they said let's try to wait one more summer to see what happens. In talking to Mike, you probably would have to start considering gearing up for the construction in November, December. So what you would know by November, December is that you probably would have a little bit of handle how much the state's economy is picked back up by that time. We would potentially have an idea what the governor's going to do, at least for funding for this year. And we would have an idea of how much federal bailout money the state got to determine how bad the crisis is, if you pause. And then the third option is to begin work as planned, but issue debt certificates to defer project costs over an extended period. So essentially, if the district wanted to, again, these are not the types of borrowings that would impact the tax levy. That's not that type of borrowing. Basically, what would happen is you would get the money up front. Let's just say 10 million, for example, because I use that as an example. If you borrowed $10 million today for the project and paid it off over 10 years, you would get the money in the bank and you'd be able to use it for the project, and you would pay off about $1,151,000 a year out of your budget. So it would cost you about $151,000 a year of interest at the current rate of 2.88%. I got this information from from Elizabeth. And then in theory, it would give you more time to adjust to what happens to the district. You'd have a longer period of time to make adjustments to operations if you need to do that. So that's a third option that the district could consider. Proceed as forward, but stretch out the payments over 10 years so that if 4, 5, 6 years from now, we're in trouble, we haven't exhausted all our $32 million or whatever phase one is of project one is of fund balance reserves. So that's kind of the issue at hand. Again, it's a lot of speculation, but I can tell you that in following economists, and I know you have a board member that Ralph follows all this stuff as well. There's a lot of people, a lot of experts, and a lot of solid articles in Cranes and federal government, federal economists that are very concerned about the long-term financial condition of Illinois, and consequently how it might flow down to school districts. So that's essentially the crux of the presentation. And I guess now we could open up for question unless somebody else has some more. Mike or Cindy want to add something to the presentation?
This is Mike. I'm good.
Jackie, I have some questions. Can I go ahead?
Sure. I just want to make sure Prior to that, Joylyn, did you have anything to?
No, I'm trying to see if Cindy needed me to connect with her. I know that this afternoon, Mr. Marturi sent the board some additional information as well.
Yeah, so to pipe in on that, so I did a webinar for the Illinois School Board Association today on the impact of COVID on the state budget and what we're likely to get in the next couple of years. And so I sent out some PowerPoint slides that show you actually the scope of the state's structural deficit as it existed before COVID, how the state arrived at the revenue loss for next year. Although the revenue loss is $2.7 billion, it's actually only going to hit next year's budget to the tune of $700 million and change because of some one-time actions. Gail, is it possible to pull those slides up so I could just give that information to the board for this discussion?
They're actually at the end of this
complements what
presentation.
Rob did.
Yes, they're at the end of this presentation.
So if you could bring them up and I could just
Yes,
go through
there you
them real
go.
quick.
And while they're doing that, just wanted to make the board aware of the reason we're making the recommendations based upon what we've looked at and thinking about where the district could be down the road.
Keep going with those slides, Chris.
There's no more slides at the end of this presentation. Let me see if I...
No, it would be here. It would be, maybe you haven't refreshed.
I'll give that a shot.
Thank you.
Nice job, Rob, by the way.
Thank you. Same amount of slides, 13.
Same amount, but let me hold on. Give me 1 second here.
Yeah, get the link from the agenda, Chris.
I mean, the way I'm getting to this is from that link. I'll try again.
$13 slides again.
Mhm.
Hey, Chris, this is Greg. If you could check your email really quickly, I'm going to forward you the PDF that we got earlier today that has this information. Perhaps until we get a chance to present these and you pull those up, we could maybe move on with a different point. But Chris, you should have it in just a moment, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Craig, did you want to ask your question? Or is Cindy?
Sure. Oh, sorry.
I have no idea what's going on. Is Cindy there or?
She is.
Can
I'm
you hear
trying
me
to see
now?
if I need to.
Yes.
Yes.
I hear you, Cindy.
All right. All right. I dialed back in, so.
Okay, and I've got the additional slides. Thanks, Sarah and Greg.
Nice mustache, by the way, Matt.
Okay, great. So if we can look at this first slide, this is actually the state's current structural deficit as it exists before the impact of COVID. So if you assume the state was starting with a balanced budget in fiscal year 2019, it didn't have a balanced budget. It had a $7.7 billion accumulated deficit. But if its revenues and expenditures were equal, the yellow bar shows what the growth in costs will be in the state of Illinois, just continuing current services and paying current debt, no new programs, et cetera, in normal economic times, normal inflation. The red line shows projected revenue growth. And so that gap between revenue and cost growth is the structural deficit the state had pre-COVID. So you could see the state's fiscal condition was somewhat iffy even before the pandemic hit. Next slide. This is the 2020 general fund budget, just that you have a figure of it. So we have a $40 billion general fund budget. If you look at the top line, I break it into two component parts. Those are hard costs under item 2. These are things the state has to pay by law. There's no discretion. So there's about $13.5 billion in hard costs. You can see debt service to third parties like banks and bondholders, the pension contribution, which is part of a statutory transfer out. There are other required statutory transfers out for like Medicaid and the road fund, et cetera, that total $800 million, and then group health insurance. And then the state budgeted $27 billion for current services, 96% of which go to, as you could see, education, health, social services, and public safety, education writ large, meaning early childhood, K-12, and higher ed. So that's the state's current budget, and it's at $27 billion in expenditures for current services. Next slide. And out of that $27 billion, if you want to look at what the state's actual fiscal condition was before COVID and where it would end up at the end of fiscal year 20, you start with the $40 billion in revenue. You take out the $13.5 billion in hard costs they have to pay by law. That leaves $26 billion in revenue for the current year. You take out the accumulated deficit carry forward from fiscal year 2019, which they have to pay by law before the end of this year. So that $7.7 billion comes out, leaving $18.9. They're going to spend $27 on current services, meaning the deficit, even before COVID, was going to grow from $7.7 billion to $8 billion, or roughly 30% of current expenditures in the state's general fund are actually deficit spending. We don't have the revenue to cover them. Next slide. So here's the COVID impact as far as we know from Gombe. Fiscal year 2021, as Rob said, they project a decline in revenue for the upcoming fiscal year of $2.7 billion from earlier projections. That's going to be offset. $1.2 billion in short-term borrowing, $4 billion in deferral of some interest costs that they have on investments, et cetera, that they could defer for a year, and about $323 million in interfund borrowing from other funds the state has that have cash, meaning the actual revenue impact next year won't be $2.7 billion, it'll be about $780 million. So that's going to be the actual shortfall in revenue in 2021. How we get to that big $7.4 billion shortfall potential for 2022. Revenue is projected to decline by $4.6 billion over current projections for 2022. So there's the major impact from the COVID decline in the economy. You have to repay that short-term borrowing. So there's another $1.2 billion in costs. You have to repay that deferral of $400 million from one year to the next. And that comes up to your initial shortfall for the year of $6.2 billion. Then if the state does not, voters do not ratify the fair tax amendment in this election, then $1.2 billion in revenue they counted on raising through the new graduated rate structure obviously won't materialize. And that's what jumps the potential shortfall for 2022 up to $7.4 billion. That's a 27% decline in revenue. You add that to their already deficit spending level of 30%, and you're looking at a 57% mismatch in 2022 between projected revenue and the cost of maintaining fiscal year 2020 expenditures. And so that's highly significant, and that's why people are concerned. So if you jump to the next slide. So here's the pressure created for the evidence-based funding model and why there's going to be pressure on legislators not to cut it quite as much as they might otherwise. So this compares Illinois to the rest of the nation, Illinois in the red, the rest of the nation in blue, in the portion of education funding covered by local property taxes versus state taxes. So for the left comparison, you can see that nationally, 44% of the cost of education is covered by property taxes. In Illinois, it's 67%. You flip that, nationally, a state tax revenue will cover 47% of the cost of K-12, whereas here in Illinois, it's only 24%. So this is the reason why our property taxes are so high. Illinois is literally the outlier on both ends. We rank first in the country in the portion of K-12 paid for by property tax and 50th in the portion covered by state revenue. So that does put a lot of pressure on the governor and the state legislature to do whatever they can for evidence-based funding. However, in this environment and looking at a deficit in 2 years that could be close to 57% of their budgeted expenditures, they are going to have to make some cuts somewhere, and education may be on the line. Next slide. So this is why our local property taxpayers are so frustrated by this over-reliance on property taxes to fund schools. I just thought I'd give you the data. From 1990 to 2018, after you adjust for inflation, so in real terms, property tax revenue has grown in Illinois by almost 70%, whereas median income has only grown by 11%. So you've got property tax burden in our state growing at a rate that outstrips the rate of growth in income for most people by 5.5, 6 times. And the whole reason for this is the state has historically been an outlier in underfunding K-12 education. So the next slide. Here's the fiscal pressure created by the pension ramp. So this is another thing to be very aware of. This was that 1995 law that was passed to sort of get the pensions healthy at the state level, the 5 pension systems, by the year 2045. If you add the 2 bars together, that's the actual payment required every year under the ramp to make the pension systems healthy. So if they make these payments, the systems will be 90% funded in 2045. They're only about 39% funded today. You're healthy at 80. I broke the payments down into their component parts. The little pinkish part at the bottom there, that's the actual normal cost of funding benefits being earned by workers. The blue bar is the repayment plan passed in 1995 to cover the repayment of what was underfunded in the past. So it's that debt service line that's killing us, which is some really horrible piece of irresponsible fiscal legislation that kicked the can down the road. And we do have some news on the TRS pension system already. So the TRS pension system had about $50 billion in assets as of January of this year, and it had $78 billion in unfunded liability. It has already lost, due to COVID, $4 billion in assets. So what will happen is those blue bars for repayment of debt are going to get significantly higher over this period of time. So that's going to be an additional payment obligation on the state unless it restructures this debt. Next slide. And so here's one way to restructure the debt. This is one of the things they're thinking about at Springfield, that if this happens, it will help school districts from a funding standpoint. The red line that you see going across the graphic, that is the current pension ramp. The light bluish grayish bars, those are the re-amortized payments. You put more money in up front, you pay less money over time, you still get healthy, you save taxpayers about $45 billion. This proposal is being championed by a number of state legislators. The governor's office is very interested in it. And this is one of the things that may take fiscal pressure off. So to give my insights, because I actually spent about 3 of the 4 past days talking with people negotiating the budget for next year in the legislature that we act as advisor to. And while some of that stuff I can't talk about, I can say they are thinking about a 6-month budget. And if they do a 6-month budget, it would probably fund K-12 education at best at the austerity budget that Governor Pritzker put on the table, which means a $200 million year-to-year increase over half a year rather than the full 3. And then in the second half of the year, they would make an adjustment to the budget that would probably cut it down. And I think Rob hit the nail on the head to, at best, level funding in 2021 to 2020. So there'd be no increase at all for EBF. If, in fact, it goes negative, I think Rob did a good job explaining this, although the language in the statute can be interpreted more than one way on what happens with the offsets. So we may actually at Oak Park River Forest High School be able to retain some of the property tax relief grant. And here's why. He's exactly right. What happens is if there's a negative funding situation, the amount of growth in base funding minimum for all Tier 3 and Tier 4 school districts is zeroed out. So let's just say that's $20 million or $15 million in the last 2 or 3 years. And it's zeroed out on a per student basis for all Tier 3 and Tier 4 districts, meaning the cost is averaged out across the districts. So our district, which got a property tax relief grant, would pay the same average cost reduction as many districts that did not, meaning our portion of our property tax relief grant would be somewhat subsidized by these other districts, and we would retain part of it. And there's an adjustment to that calculation that there are no rules or regs for, and we've been on the phone with ISB trying to figure out how they'll interpret it. So the good news is we may not lose all of the property tax relief grant in a negative funding situation. The bad news is we may, and the worst news is there isn't clear enough legislative language nor regulations issued under the legislation to understand how ISB will actually apply the language. So I think, you know, if we want to be cautious, you would want to budget as if we're going to lose that full property tax relief grant. I've run a couple of scenarios, and I could share them with you later for what the different things could look like there. So that's my quick summary on the state's current fiscal condition and what's going on.
Thank you, Ralph. And Craig, you have the first question.
Hi, Rob, and hi, everybody.
Hi, Craig.
So let's say the first question is, let's play this out and say we don't do the $32 million project now. When we get out into year 3 in 20, the slide's gone now, but out onto the far right-hand side of your graph, how much time does it really buy us until we have a problem? A year, maybe 2 years?
If you got hit with both,
yeah,
and it's a good point, and we're showing a $15 million deficit, and certainly you can't make that type of adjustment to your budget and still provide quality education to the kids, but so maybe you could offset it somewhat, but yeah, you're maybe buying 2 years of being able to cover deficits of that magnitude, but yeah, absent, you know, the word that I don't want to mention.
So, you know, so we're maybe buying, if we were to not do the project at all and not take care of our building, we would buy maybe 2 years until we had to take the same actions we would have had to take 2 years before, right?
Yes.
I guess another question to ask is, if we delayed a year, or we delayed a year, what more would we really know than we know right now? And what more do we have control over?
That's a great question. I mean, we would know if the General Assembly adopted, if the General Assembly passed a property tax freeze during this session. We would know if the federal government, if and how much the federal government bailed out the state. You know, as Ralph's showing his numbers, you know, if they come out, I'm not saying that they would, but if they came out and gave the state $20 billion, well, that all of a sudden pushes back the need to have to cut evidence-based funding. I think that, but again, I also feel that there's going to probably be a 6-month budget, so we really won't know from that perspective. I could see the governor doing a 6-month budget and kind of under the same guise that you guys are potentially talking about, is that what would you know in the next 6 months? You would know if the progressive income tax passed, and you would have you would know how much the state bailed you, the federal government bailed you out, and you might be able to get a sense of if the economy is starting to come back strong, although it's probably going to be premature. We probably won't know by the end of the year that situation. Probably won't have enough time to gear up where it needs to. So you'll know a little bit of information. You'll know, if I had to put a percentage in it, you'll know 20% of the picture of what's going to happen with this crisis.
And so, but my view is I'm not sure I know enough more to know whether I push the curve out at all, you know, another year or what. So I guess I'll, you know, I had one more question to see if I can think about how to ask it correctly. I'll pass it to other questions. I have some more comments, but let's get some other questions in the room.
But I will say something that you just said, Craig, sparked something I wanted to mention. Again, there's not a complete right or wrong answer to what the board decides to do for going forward. I will say this, more than likely, your current financial condition is going to be the best financial condition you're going to be in for many, many years, maybe forever. So if there are capital projects that need to be done, this, again, I'm going to state both sides of it because I think that's what my responsibility is. If there are projects that need to be done, this is probably the best financial condition you'll be in this moment in time.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with my other question, which, and one more technical question, borrowing. If we were given, let's say the state goes to junk, what happened, do you have a feel, and this is probably an Elizabeth question, but what happens to our ability to borrow as a school district when that happens?
Yep, so actually I priced the deal with Elizabeth 2 weeks ago in this crisis. When Standard & Poor's came out with that warning about downgrading the state of Illinois, and the information got out, the Illinois municipal bond market tanked. And basically school districts were not able to get into the market just for the fact that they were in Illinois. Funds were dumping their Illinois bonds and Illinois municipal bonds and Illinois school district bonds as fast as they could. And so not only did municipal bonds nationwide get hurt, because there's a concern not only for Illinois, but it hit particularly hard in Illinois because, again, Illinois has these pre-existing conditions that makes it more vulnerable than other states. Illinois and New Jersey are very vulnerable to this situation.
So our AAA rating or our AA rating, whatever it is we have, gets severely haircut,
right? Just
because we're in Illinois.
Right. So interest rates went up, gosh, 150. I mean, they're still near historic lows, but as of today, like you know, the markets have settled down the last week or two, and there's probably been a half a dozen or so municipal bonds in Illinois, school bonds, that have sold within the last 2 weeks, where it was shut down the 2 weeks prior to that. So it's opened up. If in fact Illinois gets downgraded to junk, you're probably going to have the same type of situation, and there'll be an extra emphasis on the credit quality of the school district for school districts that want to borrow. So you have a strong credit rating, but certainly large projected deficit. Your district is still would be still considered and rated a pretty strong school district.
So the last question, and then I'll shut up. Sorry, Jackie. Let's say we do the project, and we have the situation you see in the graph. Even in that situation, relative to other schools in the state, where would we fall? Would we still be in one of the strongest financial situations of any school in the state?
No.
No?
I would say, I think that your district, I truly believe this, that your district is probably maybe the most vulnerable district to this downfall. And I'll tell you why, for two reasons. Number one is you're highly dependent on real estate taxes. I think so let's start there. You're highly dependent on real estate taxes. So a property tax freeze and potentially a drop in tax collections and an increase in tax appeals could hit you more than most districts. But on the other side, most of those districts meet the profile of tier 3, tier 4 school districts. And those districts, generally speaking, didn't get a lot of money from the state anyway, so they don't care if the state peels away the money they got new, because they've only gotten a few dollars here and there. So you have both ends, because you benefited the most from evidence-based funding of any Tier 4 school district. So you have the vulnerability on the state level, and you have the vulnerability on the real estate tax level. And then my final point is that if the state does have to cut evidence-based funding, there's a formula, and after they hit Tier 4 and Tier 3 really hard, then they just break it off by pupil. But you're set up for exposure. Other districts that I work with that don't get a lot of real estate taxes and that are in Tier 1 or Tier 2, a property tax freeze doesn't impact them that much, because maybe only 25% of their money comes from real estate taxes. And they're probably not going to get hit that bad with evidence-based funding, because every decrease after that's going to be divided by the 2 million students that are throughout the state. So they'll get hit, but I think you guys will be hit harder. And you guys have, again, you have, well over a year worth of fund balance reserve right now. But if 3 years from now you're down to 75%, then and you're starting to run deficits, then all of a sudden you're more in the median range. And if things get worse, then all of a sudden you become one of the more vulnerable school districts.
Thank you.
One of the other things too that I had spoken to PMA, and I asked them to ask how far out can we go, and they said that if we didn't receive another penny from here until next February, and also spending the 10 million, that's how far we would be able to go out. But that wouldn't be not receiving another penny. So that puts us at, just looking at that would put us at approximately 10 months that we would have, but then you would have nothing.
And Cook County taxes might be pushed back a month or two.
Correct.
Most.
Right.
Tom, did you have a question? You're unmuted, that's why I'm asking.
Oh, I've been unmuted, probably unintentionally. I do have questions, and I have a lot of other comments, but I think just to start with questions, if that can be. And some of these I asked, and they blend together. So my first question really is kind of a small one. It's a precursor to this because we're talking much more strategically, but I asked, what is the projection for our district for fiscal 20 with COVID? We know that we're going to be closed for the rest of the school year, so that's just a data point, and I know it's a tactical one, but where do we project to end fiscal 20 because of all the changes? That's a Cindy question, I believe.
Correct.
And yeah. I got a bunch of, good.
Oh, sorry. So I took a look, I tried to analyze, we're looking at the expenditures that we have to pay and also to some of the revenues that we're receiving. Looking at the sides where we could say that we could possibly have a savings, we can have a possible savings in expenditures of approximately $2.5 million. So that would mean that we're going to get, we're going to spend less than what we had budgeted by 2.5. Revenue seems to be on track, depending on, we're basically done June. If there's a lot of appeals, we really don't get anything from from property tax. So I don't tend to count our property tax that much. It just depends on the timing of the anything that we're going to get from the state or the federal for like Title I and Title II. That's all. So I would say that we would be about 2.5 million under what our budget had said.
Okay. The next data question is from a cost standpoint, and if we defer a year, what is, first of all, the money we have, the $100 million will earn us what? By us having our money sit in the bank, we will earn how much?
I would
because
say, Go ahead, Cindy.
I'm sorry. Okay. Because our investments go out for a year to basically 2 years, we won't have that much of a loss as the impact right now. Looking at it, we should have about $1 million that we should have in interest for next year.
In total?
Yes.
Okay.
That's interest I'm talking about.
And the if we defer the project a year, the estimate on what the incremental cost of the project would be, again, I'm just looking for a ballpark, which is, the escalation that we talked about last time, but I'd like to hear what that is.
Mike?
Yeah, Tom, I'm not sure I could pull that out of the air. There's a couple of factors. I could cite the factors. It would be difficult to quantify those. So maybe I'll just articulate the factors. And if my colleagues from Pepper or FGM want to chime in, please feel free to do so. But the delay would cause us to basically, there obviously we've been figuring out a 4% escalation, so we could look at what that spend would be in that time frame and figure out what that dollar amount would be. There's also some non-tangible, such as we've got the project ready to roll right now, so you'd basically lose the momentum. You would probably lose some of your staffing. You'd have to rebid. You would want to rebid to see where things are, and it's difficult to say where things might be. We've already seen some issues with COVID-19 with respect to supply chain of materials, which could say some of those costs even now might be escalated beyond what we had planned. So it's unclear what that might be going forward. And beyond the materials, we don't know what the labor market is going to be like. So it's conceivable, the labor market could be gangbusters, and that 4% could be more. It's also conceivable it might be flat or less. So that there's a lot of guesswork there. I don't have a number for you. I'm going to see if either someone from Pepper or FGM would care to take a swing at this.
Tom?
Yes.
I want to give you something. I pulled up my projections on this. If we looked at 21 for investments, we would have about $1.4 million for 21, for 22 about $1 million, and for 23 about $600,000.
Are we waiting for someone to?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Lance is on. Josh, would you have any, Josh Warner, would you have any comment on that?
This is Josh Warner with Pepper. I mean, I think Mike hit it kind of head on. I mean, there's a lot of different factors that play in. That, I mean, they all have different scenarios that would come into play. So to try to put a number to it, I mean, it's really just guesswork.
This is Lance with Pepper. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, one thing when we're talking about escalation, we've got two scenarios. We got the labor component and we got the material component. The labor component, we know automatically is going to escalate every year, regardless of, the unions have, 2 and 3, 4-year agreements in place. So their rates are going to escalate every year in June, no matter what. So that component. So if you just say, 50% of your construction cost is labor and 50% is material. And that's just kind of an average, depending on what you're actually doing, that changes, but just as a rule of thumb. So, half of the cost of the work is definitely up, and then the other half, the materials market, that a lot of that's in the commodities. So that's really kind of hard to tell, but on average, Mike hit it head on that you're probably, definitely in the, 4% escalation is not uncommon, in our market sector. But, COVID-19 is definitely kind of a new normal. So I'm not exactly sure, what that percentage of escalation, but there will definitely be escalation.
The one other factor, Tom, that we should mention also is a delay would push us out probably another year. So the extension of the time frame of the project opens us up for escalation at the back end of it also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, my last question, just to get understanding, is going back, Rob, I want to go back to something you stated about, because Craig kind of looped back to it, which you said that without a federal bailout to the state would be done. And I don't know, can you elaborate at all, what you mean if there is no federal bailout and what that means to us?
Well, I think that by done, I mean, just today, senators in Washington have argued that that the federal government shouldn't bail out states that have caused a lot of the problems themselves through mismanagement, and that it would be better for those states to go bankrupt. Something to that effect. And I would, the magnitude is, like Ralph showed the numbers, such a high percentage of the disposable budget is related to education. I could only imagine, I mean, mathematically, if we don't get the bailout from the federal government and the district can't borrow its way out of it, the state is going to have to figure out a way to deliver education to 2 million students in a much more cost-effective manner, even if it compromises to some level education. So I would see probably a very strong push for consolidation of school districts. I could see movements towards things such as statewide salary schedules, looking at some of the stuff that Ralph's talking about as it relates to restructuring pension debt. They're going to have to think outside the box significantly because an $8 billion hole can't solve itself. So perhaps just the fact that it can't solve itself would lend itself to the federal government deciding to bail them out. I don't know, but certainly absent that, something is going to have to happen that's dramatic, that's not in people's current mindset at this moment in time.
Well, and so I'll weigh in there. So number one, Tom, states are sovereign entities. They can't constitutionally, under the U.S. Constitution, declare bankruptcy. So the U.S. senators that are throwing that language around would have to get a constitutional amendment passed to authorize states to declare bankruptcy. So that's just not something that's going to happen. And even if it did happen, you couldn't discharge the pension debt that the state owes because it's a constitutionally guaranteed right. And even though bankruptcy courts have broad discretion from an equitable standpoint to just discharge and modify debts, they can't take away constitutionally protected rights. So when you see bankruptcy courts at the municipal level, because municipalities, if there is state authorizing legislation, can in fact declare bankruptcy. So when you see a municipality like a San Diego or a Detroit declare bankruptcy, those states don't have constitutional guarantees of pension debt. So it's just debt like any other debt, and a bankruptcy court can relieve it or modify it. So it wouldn't even help Illinois because we have this constitutional guarantee that takes it out of the purview of the bankruptcy court. So it puts us in a bit of a unique situation. I'll point out that over the Great Recession, the period of the Great Recession, the state lost over $8 billion in revenue in its general fund, and it took it 2 or 3 years to dig out from that hole, but it did dig out from that hole. What I would guess you would see is some combination of revenue increase, even if they don't get this graduated rate tax ratified by voters and implemented as of January 1, there'll be a bump in the income tax rate. I mean, the state's going to raise revenue one way or another. and it'll either bump the income tax rate and or expand the sales tax base. It will do something to re-amortize the pension debt to take some pressure off. I'm not quite as convinced as Rob is that there'll be a property tax freeze for a number of reasons. I mean, if the state, and I think, Rob, I do agree with you on the optics of kicking some pension obligations back down to the local level, that looks better for the state. So if the state's going to kick some school, the obligations for funding teacher pensions, at least normal costs thereof, down to the school level, they're sure not going to freeze property taxes at the same time they're doing that. They get that that's a no-go. And every discussion of a property tax freeze that I have seen, and they are not talking about that right now in the budget discussions, which doesn't mean tomorrow they won't. I'm just saying it's not that hot of a topic right now, but everyone that I've seen has been limited in duration to 2 to 3 years. And then they would allow you to go back to your levy. Now, I can't imagine the kind of devastation a property tax freeze would wreak on municipalities, et cetera, for police, fire, streets, and sands, all those things they got to fund. So if there is going to be any property tax freeze, it will single out education. I do think that that's what they would freeze, is the right of school districts to levy. And that's why it would be a limited freeze, because school districts would be singled out. They won't freeze property tax levies, though, if they push down some of the responsibility to fund normal costs. Former Senate President Cullerton had a couple of different ways of doing that. And as Rob knows, each one of those phased in the obligation to fund no normal cost at the school district level over a 4 to 6 year period, depending on the plan. So there's a lot of variation. I don't think it's game over, though. I think the state will survive and get through it. I mean, as poorly as the fiscal management has been in Illinois, a lot of these more drastic things you hear about, like bankruptcy, really aren't part of the deal. So you're just going to have a 2 or 3 year rough period of revenue until the economy turns around, and the state will do some things like they've done in the past, whether it's, but one gimmick, for instance, the state has done to great success in the past that they are thinking about doing now is when they issue debt, even if it's junk debt or whatever, if they take the revenue from, or the proceeds from that bond and spend it on Medicaid, they get a dollar for dollar match from the feds automatically under the Medicaid program. So they double that value. And since money's fungible, since they double that value to cover Medicaid costs, that frees up revenue from other tax sources to fund things like education. So there are a number of tools in the kit that they will use to get through the next couple of years. I think it's going to be a very challenging 2 to 3 fiscal years, but I'm not quite as game over maybe as Rob is.
Does anyone else have any questions?
You know, I have a question just to clarify those 3 options. Option 3, I think it talked about bonding, and my sense is that the most in my view, we would bond is at 13 million. That 20 million has already been earmarked for this phase, and that would leave around 13 million. Is my math correct? Am I remembering those numbers correct? And I guess that's to Jackie and anyone else. Joylyn.
32 million has been allocated for Project 1.
Right.
The other 20 million was for set aside for Project 2.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so I guess that raises a question of whether, and this is just me off the cuff, I don't know if there's wisdom in considering allocating that towards 1 based on these new circumstances. I just don't know.
I just want to make sure I understood you. When you say reallocating, what did you mean, Matt?
Well, I guess I'm saying is we have $20 million. It's a number that is within our overall $100 million roughly in our general fund, right? In our reserves. I know
it's in our fund balance.
Yeah, it's in a different category. But I'm wondering if instead of holding that off until phase 2, because now there's a lot of questions about everything, including timing on everything and scope potentially, would it make sense for us to consider moving that $20 million, you know, it may, and it's more than semantics, but in one way it's semantics, but it's about really, you know, committing and authorizing the use of that $20 million that had been put in this category for down the road for phase 2, saying, let's have that for phase 1. So that would create around a $12 million, you know, left for us to figure out how to fund, whether it's through reserves or through lemonade sales or through bonding, as has been laid out in option 3.
Matt, that no matter what would just be a fund balance that we would be using, no matter where we put the 20 million. It's not like it sits in its own separate account outside of our regular balances. That would still be in there. So no matter what, we would still have the same impact from where it's coming from.
Right. Okay.
So the impact would be the same.
All right. Thank you. I guess because in my mind, that's a thought as to how to split that third option. Again, we're not there yet in our conversation, but I just wanted to put that out there at this early stage of our dialogue.
And part of, you know, when we talk about the debt, when we talked about going to using like debt certificates, that was actually something Mike and I had started talking about a while ago when we were looking at the 10-year project prior to COVID-19 coming along. So that, you know, we were starting to pursue it back then to see what we could do. And now, you know, we're basically in this situation right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's here. I mean, I guess one just general remark I would add for all is that there's the big rock to put into this jar of discussion, and then there's a lot of granularity and rounding errors and just so many unknowns. You know, even down to how much labor costs will be next year. So I feel pretty comfortable with knowing where I'm leaning heavily right now. So anyway, so that's all I'll say for now. I know we've got to try to structure this dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Any who would like to weigh in next?
Hi, it's Sarah. So my concern is this. I mean, I think Rob hit the nail on the head when he said we're never going to be in a better financial position than we are now, at least not for the foreseeable future. And you know, the Project One project is all of our most needed spaces, right? Like our most vulnerable students, our most needed spaces. What if any conversations have had around restructuring what is in Project One? Could we do just the team spaces, or could we do, you know, postpone the cafeteria or something to that extent?
Mike, you want to address that?
Yes, certainly. I'd be happy to. So, to be honest, we've begun those conversations. Many of the pieces are dominoed on the other pieces. If you look at the cafeteria student resource center, that's if you think about that game where you have all those tiles you have to move around. Well, we don't have many tiles. We don't have any spaces to move the tiles. So, not to say we couldn't look at how we might restructure, as you put it, the project in a way that we might be able to break some of those off. But the way the project was originally conceived is that you would do that, create that new square footage with that student resource center and south cafeteria. And then once that space was created, then you could start moving other pieces around and actually have places to move things, so you wouldn't be, you know, trying to do renovations all in place. So I'm not saying it can't be done. We've started those conversations, but the reality of it is that the difficulty that it would have to be restructured. So I probably shouldn't say more than that. Anything's possible, but I'm not sure that would be best. That would be the best approach.
Josh Cerniak from FGM Architects here. If I could add to that very quickly, if the new South Cafeteria and Student Resource Center were not done, it would, as far as we can see it now, and we've been in this now for a solid year, it would preclude the expansion of the special education area. So, and that's a significant part of Project One, and that goes back to what Mike was saying about these pieces that have to be moved around. And the reason for that is because the biology classrooms that are on the first floor that take up a large part where special education would move to, those are supposed to go to the vacated area that the tutoring center and makerspace and library that they'll give up when they can move into their new space. So if that new space never comes, yes, you could still do the renovation of the 64 classrooms, but in addition to not being able to expand special education, you would not be able to gain those infill classrooms through. So it's not only that biology classrooms move, but then you move some additional classrooms, and like you pointed out earlier, the addition of some of those collaboration areas up in the northwest corner of the building on the second and third floor.
Thanks, Josh.
Any other questions, Sarah?
No, I don't think I have questions.
Do you have, want to weigh in on how you're looking at the recommendations?
So while I obviously have grave concerns about our state's budget and what that might mean for us, it also seems to me that with the escalating construction costs, we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Not to use such a brutal phrase, but it sort of feels that way, that we're really shortchanging our students yet again and kicking the can down the road yet again. So I am not inclined to postpone it.
Thank you. Gina? Gina?
Sorry, I was getting to the mute button.
Sorry.
That's okay. As I was going back to review the recommendation that the administration was putting forth, and I feel like we're in such a tough position because there's so many unknowns right now, even though the factors, Ralph, and thank you, Rob and Ralph, for your extensive reports and for sending that information over earlier too, Ralph. We do know that a hard hit is coming. I too was struck with the idea that this is the best financial position we're going to be in for a long time. These are conversations that I've had in numerous spaces besides here. I feel like my first inclination was definitely we need to wait because we just don't know what's going to happen. But I feel like if we're going to get anything done, now might be the time to get it done. As challenging as that, even though I must say that feels challenging in and of itself. Still, that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. And I actually had a question that I forgot to ask, and it is just about the recommendation to delay. There was some talk about what that would mean in terms of having to go out to bid, but there are costs associated with waiting, correct me if I'm wrong, that have to do with perhaps would we continue with the exact same, plan? Would there be a need to incur costs because of the delay that have to do with either design or things other than the escalating costs that happens, as you all already discussed, that will happen with construction costs?
That's an architect question. I'm not sure if there would have to be any more design. I mean, they're still working now, so I don't know if there would have to be any different design work.
And I guess the other part of that, and just before I be quiet, is the not just the design work, but if we go out to bid, I mean, there are costs associated with
Yes.
whether it's administrative costs inside the district or on top of the potential changes in what things are going to cost.
That is correct.
And is there a way to understand what those costs might be?
Josh?
Sure. It would largely depend on if we were going to start redesigning from where we're at now. If there was a pause and there was no change made to the current plans, the restart costs would be very, very minor from the architect and engineering fee side. Yet if we either keep moving forward but have a substantial redesign, then there would be cost associated with that, same as if there's a pause and then a substantial redesign. The order of magnitude, if in those scenarios, essentially looking at the total budget for project one, which is 32.6 million, the AE fees are approximately 7% of that. And if we had to throw everything out that we've done to date, then you would incur the costs that you've incurred to date all over again. If that wasn't the scenario, then that would that you wouldn't have that, right? I mean, you wouldn't have that to anywhere near to that extent.
So let me help with this. So my position would be, there's no way we're going to redesign everything, right? So that's not going to happen. What we could possibly do is we could entertain some possible shifting of things around to see what we could do. More likely, the most likely scenario would be we would pause. We would basically look at what things we might want to do. We've done a large portion of the design already. So we would look for refinements. We'd look for other places. We actually are still right in the process right now of looking for ways that we could, continue to hone down the budget. So we would continue on that path. The rebidding would happen simply because the conditions might be different significantly from the bidding we're doing right now. The bidding environment would be significantly different if we were going to be doing it in November or December. So I think that's just good practice to do that. And I don't think that would be a significant cost. There is some cost, but to Josh's point, it wouldn't be significant in terms of the cost to do that.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Gina.
A lot of conversation that I've been hearing in multiple spaces has been about the idea that we may not even be able to go back into the buildings in August. That the unknowns are so high that we don't even know if we'll resume regular school in the fall. And so I'm just curious, like we were scheduled to begin working this summer. I'm curious, is there a possibility of not starting then, but maybe even shorter term later? Or I don't know.
If school doesn't open, some districts that I've talked to are actually taking advantage of school being closed to move the project work up to try to get a speedier conclusion to their projects. Mm-hmm. If we wait until July or August, is that what you're asking?
Yes, that is.
It just puts off finishing it longer, which then puts off the start of project too.
Okay, thank you.
The other point I would make also is we actually are accelerating and moving forward our summer 2020 work, which has already been approved by the board, and we are moving that forward. So we are, to whatever extent possible, making hay with having people in the building.
Hi, this is Lance with Pepper. I just wanted to add one comment too. So we planned on starting that South Cafe SRC edition in basically in June. If we were to push that out, September, October, with the foundations and the building enclosure would be pushing further into the winter, and there would be more, it would cost more money to enclose and heat that structure being built at that time of year. So I just want to make sure you keep that in mind.
There is one other component to that as well. A few month delay in the start of the South CAF and SRC would not, it would push the completion out to where it would miss the occupancy for the spring semester in 2022. The current schedule has the South CAF and SRC being occupied in December of 21. So that's just another consideration to bring forward.
I have another comment. It's not really a question, it's just a comment. I'm thinking about the community and the ability for our community to understand this decision either way we go. Because likely they're not going to sit through this meeting by video and listen to everything that we just discussed. And so whichever decision that we make, I feel like we need to really be able to explain that to our community, why we moved forward or why we didn't move forward. Because because I could, considering the emotional upheaval that people are in right now, that are managing through this crisis, I could see people having a perception of this not being a sound decision to keep going, or not being a sound decision to not go now. So I'm highly mindful of the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and there are a lot of people in our community who are struggling with understanding how rolling out and our requirement and duty to make sure they really fully understand what went into our process.
Absolutely. The communication is going to be critical either way.
I have a real quick question. I heard, I think it was Lance mentioned June as the breaking ground potential. Is there any way, if we decide as a board that we do want to move forward now, to move the timing up at all, to make it to go quicker?
Yeah, this is Josh Warner with Pepper. That would be the plan if we were going, kind of taking advantage of the students being out and gearing up to start that. We'd have to, once we get the go ahead, we'd have to kind of look at the schedule, but it could for sure get going before June.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Another question, Mr. Jean again.
Yeah.
If social distancing orders stay in effect through June, the work can be completed in light of having all of whatever those social distancing orders are?
So what we've been told is construction is an essential function. And so it is, in fact, they've approved our permits to do work. And so supposedly it falls under a whole different umbrella.
And we actually had this conversation in our meetings. One of the things that I've continued to say to the team is we want to make sure that we don't want anyone getting sick, right? We don't want the construction workers getting sick. We're going to maintain the social distancing. And Lance actually spoke up at one of our meetings. The construction folks have a methodology that they use in terms of, anyway, when they work together, in terms of the PPE, or they have their own precautions and also their own safety measures that will be employed, so that they can assure us that they're doing things within the parameters that have been set forth, so no one's going to be put in danger. Lance, did you want to comment further on that, or?
No, you hit the nail pretty much on the head. But that's what I was going to say is we have a pretty robust COVID-19 plan. 100% of all of our people are required to wear face masks. We're getting very close to where we're going to require it out of all of our subcontractors. And then there's certain municipalities that require it regardless. So even if you're an essential service if the municipality requires it. Some of our K-12 clients are in those municipalities, obviously, so that'll require all of our people, whether you're within a 6-foot distance or not, everyone will have 100% face mask.
Thank you.
Craig?
Yeah, just my thoughts. You know, I don't think that we can. I don't think this is a can that we should kick down the road. We kind of owe that to our students. We have momentum here. We need to keep going. I understand there's a whole bunch of financial risks. There's a ton of unknown, but in a year, I don't think I'm going to be any better off to make this decision than we're making it now. So, you know, my lean is that, you know, now is the time to do it. And I guess my last point on that is, you know, we're spending $32 million. A lot of that's going into our community. So for us to pull $32 million from our community is also probably pulling jobs out of our community too. And that's the exact behavior that causes the crisis and the economic issues. So since I think we have the ability to do it, we should do it.
And this is Ralph piping in. I really agree with what Craig just said. I don't think we're going to know a lot more in a few months, and I think there is an opportunity to expedite some of the work this summer with the building not being occupied for summer school and other things. And so, given all that, and just to echo what Craig said, I think kicking the can down the road isn't prudent. We'll end up driving up our costs, and is not the right step. So I'm interested in proceeding. I would be willing to look at issuing some debt as a hedge. I think that might make some sense, but I would continue going with the current timeline at a minimum, if not a faster timeline.
Same here on the debt. I think that would be a good hedge to look into.
Well, this is Tom. I want to weigh in just because they're kind of tipping our cards. So I'm right there with what was just said, but I want to provide my perspective. Having been through, you know, first as it relates to our fund balance. You know, when I first joined the board, we had a fund balance problem, and we are still outside of our fund balance targets. And I consider in some ways our fund balance a curse because sometimes we make bad decisions because of our fund balance. And so, but it's a blessing that we have it, and it's here for this purpose. We've planned for it, and we need to utilize it. Secondly, as we look at our spending, what was communicated by Mike recently was we are, you know, while our costs as a district are, you know, among the top in the state, our expenditure on facilities is not. We've kicked this can down the road. We have not invested in our facilities to the level that we need to. So echoing what Craig and what Ralph were saying, we can't do that and continue to kick the can down the road. It's not in the interest of our students nor in our community. Third, we have zero debt. So I echo what was just said, and there, you know, I don't know if we look at the specific options, but bringing in debt now, there's no better, well, I mean, we can work at the executive, but right now is a good time to be borrowing from a big picture perspective. So for those reasons, I am in support, are not in favor of the recommendation to delay, but am in support of moving full speed ahead with the possibility of looking at bringing debt into the game.
Okay, thank you. Everything that I've heard this evening has not swayed my position of the one that we already voted on in terms of Project One and how it starts, and I concur with our issues with our fund balance and the set aside that has already occurred. And also, you know, hearing that we already have our permits and that costs will go up, having to, you know, to go out in the future. And we don't have, the assumptions I'm going under is that given everything we've heard, that the building, the facility will be empty of students this summer. And that does allow for, in the same way that, you know, the construction on Lake Street, which started right outside my window, 7:20 a.m. every morning except Saturday and Sunday. But, you know, the work has progressed in a way because there is a slowdown in, you know, traffic. And it sounds, you know, I think about what I heard before about what would be required to put up measures to, you know, for students having the safety and rerouting. And that's something that we would not have to be concerned about this summer, and taking advantage of the weather. I think postponing just puts us into winter, and I don't understand why we would do that. And I think the debt piece needs to be considered, as we have talked about in the past. It does allow for, not just for the reasons already stated, but also it spreads out the responsibility of this project to future citizens and taxpayers coming in a way that we've talked about before. So I am not, the pictures that were painted between Ralph and Rob and that information just coming in today, I think we can't overlook the fund balance and the plans that have already been laid and what it means to honor that, that work to improve our building and for our students in our community. So that's where I fall.
I think you guys are ready for the vote.
Well, I'm not sure. Are we voting?
You would vote it down. You would vote our recommendation down.
Your recommendation included so we're going to explore the other.
Our recommendation was to postpone.
Okay, but okay, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the presentation. Yes, okay, so let us, unless there's any other questions or comments, we are ready for the vote.
Mr. Martiri?
Try that again. No.
Mr. Barron?
No.
Mr. Isley?
No.
Ms. Harris?
No.
Mr. Kovsky?
No.
Ms. Spivey? Dr. Moore?
No.
Ms. Spivey?
Her screen is black.
Yeah, she's frozen.
Can she type it in? Is that allowed?
Just said she's locked out.
Can she tell you her vote?
She's back. No.
Ooh.
She says, I vote no.
And she said she would, so I think
And her
that's
thumbs down.
Just tell her thumbs down.
Do a thumbs down.
So this is what I heard. Thank you, first of all, to the board. And what I heard in the discussion is for us to now come back with a way of going into debt to pay for some of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, we'd certainly like to see that.
Okay. Thank you.
We're moving with the assumption that our timeline has not been altered.
Got it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
So now we can proceed with the other two items.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So the other item is the EHC Industries Incorporated abatement contract for 2020 Project 1. At the conclusion of the presentation, the recommendation is that the board approve EHC Industries Incorporated for the 2020 Project 1 abatement in the amount of $150,000 for asbestos abatement services. Mike, is there anything you want to say?
Actually, Jeff is presenting this one.
Okay, Jeff.
Yes, you pretty much covered it. There was, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. There was a little bit of a variance in the range of the bids, as you can see. We had some new contractors bidding on the work that had not been in the building previously, and I think that there were a little bit unknowns, and hence the bid difference. But EHC did come in low, and they have gone through a scope review with Pecron Environmental Industries, and they did qualify their bid and make sure that they had everything included. I will say that this $150,000 also includes a $40,000 allowance that may and may not be used, and we feel that we have it covered with this contract.
Thanks, Jeff. Any questions?
None.
Okay.
Okay, so we need a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't do that. I took Jackie's job. I am so sorry.
No worries whatsoever. Let me get back to the other screen. So move to approve. I can't read fast enough. Move to approve the
ECA.
Go to the other screen. I can't find it right.
The ECH.
Move to approve the ECH Industries abatement contract for 2020 Project 1. And ask for a second.
Second.
And roll call.
Mr. Barron?
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Kofsky?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Mr. Martiri?
You betcha.
Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next item is the I feel like I'm not looking at the right thing. Oh, no, that's right.
Project 1 construction.
No, we just did that. The construction bid, move to approve the construction bid package number 3. And ask for a second.
Second.
And I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Mike, is Jeff presenting this one as well?
Nope, I got this one.
Okay, Mike will present this one at the conclusion. It is recommended that the board approve Project 1 Bid Package 3, Construction Management Costs to Pepper Construction for $6,605,348. This is in compliance with Strategic Plan Priority 4, Operations, Facilities, and Finance, and Board Policy 4:150.
Hey, Jackie, Can we have a couple-minute break before we start this?
Certainly. We'll take a 4-minute break.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll come back at 9:38. All right. Are we ready to reconvene?
Gail? I
Yep.
see Gail, but she looks muted.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
So we can start the presentation?
Yes.
You betcha.
Thank you.
So I'll wait for, there we go. So last month we came to you with the bid package 2, which was the demolition portion of the package. Chris, could you stick on the cover memo, please? Thank you. This is the, the package last month was really the demolition of the South Cafeteria. This particular bid package is now the excavation, the site utilities, the concrete, and the structural steel, the bases, the bones for putting up the new facility, and also for a new elevator in the addition. So the bid package, we actually had a number. This was actually a virtual bid, I may be mistaken. Maybe this was a virtual bid. So this is the first time we did a virtual bid, and that was very interesting. And it came in at about $322,000 over budget. And you can see I've got the breakdown there of what that overage was basically composed of. So the base scope, it was only about $50,000 over the base scope, which is really pretty good considering it was about over a $5 million scope. And then we put a $40,000 dollar amount in there, an allowance for damage that would be potentially in the mall itself for all the heavy trucks coming in, both for taking the old building out and bringing the new structure, the new materials for the structure in. And then there were some additions to the scope for the servery concrete, for the basement corridor concrete, and for the reinforcing the structural steel to support a photovoltaic array, which would be putting solar on the roof. So that's really the breakdown, and I'd be happy to field any questions you might have.
Questions?
I just have a request, which is there a way we can have a running tally? I mean, we have all these independent bids, but to keep things moving?
You betcha. Yes, I'll make sure you have that. We'll have that next time.
Thank you.
I have just one question. Do we have any concerns about the fact that we only got one bid for the site utilities and for the elevator? Is that surprising, or are there just so few vendors for those?
I will let Josh respond to that, because it was a virtual bid the same day we had that 55-car pileup on the Kennedy Expressway. So, Josh, would you want to comment on that?
So we officially got one site utility bid. We unofficially got 3. So we had one contractor who also bid excavation, who had someone who doesn't typically go into the office, just with their office being closed down, to put the bids together. And instead of putting the site utility bid in their envelope, they put a contract for a different project in. So that was just with some of the office staff being out. We knew their number. They were not low anyways. And then there was one other contractor that unfortunately got stuck in the traffic and couldn't get to the bid opening on time to seal their bid. That was not only for site utilities, but they had excavation and concrete as well.
It was actually the accident on the Stevenson, the jackknife semi, the car pile up was a few days after that, or a week after that.
Josh, my story was a lot better.
I had a couple questions.
Sure.
This bid package, is this bid for the materials, or this bid for the installation of the foundations, et cetera? I'm just trying to understand what the real work is behind this package, because it looks like
This is Josh with Pepper.
Yeah.
So the bid package 3 consisted of 5 packages. It was the excavation for the building, for the foundation, for the basement.
Yeah.
It was furnish and install of new site utilities. It was the furnish and install of all concrete for the building. That's footings, foundations, slabs, earth retention for the buildings that are the current areas that are next to the building. It is all structural steel, furnish and install for the entire addition, as well as the elevator, furnish and install.
So this is both labor and materials for all of those projects, right? Okay. So this essentially locks in, and this is a fixed price bid, and it locks in that price for the majority of the core work. Is that correct?
That's correct. After this package, we also awarded the building demolition. So yep, it'll get us all the way through getting the steel erected and concrete in. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we can take the vote.
Yes. Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Ms. Harris? Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes, can you not hear me?
Now I do. Mr. Martieri?
Yep.
Mr. Kowski?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you.
For the approval of the settlement agreement has been pulled, which would have been the next approval item.
So now we are at discussion.
Yes, and I would like to move the remote learning update to the next items. We have people who are ready to present that, and in that way, then they can go about their evening. So I'm going to move to the remote learning update. This item is coming forward to just update the board on where we are at this point in time. Presenting the item is Greg Johnson, Associate Superintendent, Dr. Lori Fiorenza, Director of Student Learning, Linda Parker, Director of Student Services, Dr. Kennedy Dixon, Divisional Director for Special Education, Kristen McKee, Coordinator for Learning Analytics and Support. This item is for discussion. It is in compliance with Strategic Plan Priority 2, Transformative Ed, and Board Policy 6:40. I turn it over to the team.
Thanks, Dr. Pruitt-Adams. Chris, if you could move over to the first slide. Actually, the first content slide would be great. That's perfect, this collaborative effort. Before I begin any kind of further explanation of this, I just want to say that moving an organization, this is true across the state, and so OPRF is no different than so many other high schools. But moving a high school as large as ours, pivoting from face-to-face learning and moving towards e-learning or remote learning, as we have done here, is no small feat. And there have been so many people who have put in just countless hours to make this happen. So the team that's going to be presenting here, they've been just outstanding, and so I want to publicly thank them for that. I also want to say that our division heads and Sheila Harden, on that first date that you see there on March 12th, got pulled from whatever else they had on their schedules and spent so much time developing our first plan to allow for those initial transitions during what were Act of God days, and did really solid work. And of course, most importantly, our teachers, who in very short order, not being part of all of the planning conversations because of the time we had, were able to very quickly get remote lessons in place. And they've continued to do that, right, throughout the various weeks. And so hats off to them, and I'm fortunate and happy to be working with them during this time. So let me, with that put out there, let me just say that we have gone through various stages throughout the past several weeks as we have learned, gathered more information, received new guidelines from the state, had our timeline shift And so what you see here in this timeline is really just a quick overview of how that all has evolved, okay? If we could go to the next slide, Chris. That has resulted in our remote learning plan, which you can find on our website. There's a link to it here. And that has broken down into, now it's broken down into 6 categories, as you see explained here. I'm going to highlight just 4 specific elements of that that I think are most prominent for us right now before I transition it back over to Dr. Fiorenza. But I do want to point out that the 6th one on there, the transitioning back to regular attendance days, that was really developed with the idea of we might need, you know, a quick transition. So we had kind of a makeshift plan that we developed. And now that we know that we are done through May, through our school year, we are going to have to rework that transition plan with the anticipation of something in the fall that incorporates what we typically do, right, during our institute days and so on. So look for some updates to that in the coming weeks and months ahead. Next slide, please. As far as highlights that I want to draw everybody's attention to before I pass things off here to the rest of my team. First, we have made a shift in how we do attendance. When we first went into this work, we actually were not taking attendance during active God days because, as we understood, it wasn't allowed. It wasn't the right path forward. Then we moved to period attendance for the purpose of really understanding exactly how students were engaging in each of their classes. But of course, it's really a proxy for engagement. Kids can log in for attendance purposes, but then not do the work. And so in taking a look at what was going on throughout the rest of the state, we decided to pivot again and move towards attendance that is just once a day for kids. While this attendance is not needed for you know, tracking eventual attendance percentages for state purposes, it does help us to understand how our students are engaging on a basic level with our remote learning. And Kristen McKee's going to talk about that a little bit later when we get to that part of the presentation. We had a lot of conversations about grading, a lot of conversations. The guidelines that we have from the state are pretty clear in the sense that no harm can be done during this remote time. As a result of remote learning, no students should fail a class as a result of remote learning itself. But there are options that we have for the state. There's a question that we had for a while of whether we were going to go pass and complete or whether we were going to go letter grade. And after considerable attention to this topic, after considerable debates, we eventually decided to make the move towards holding on to letter grades for a few reasons. And it really is because of this notion of no harm. There are so many unknowns, and especially at the point that we were making this decision, but many of these still exist. There are so many unknowns about how pass and completes would affect scholarships for students, how they would affect clearinghouse eligibility for athletics, and all sorts of post-secondary experiences for our kids, that we felt that it would be best to hold on to letter grades, especially considering the fact that through a complete quarter, our kids earned letter grades through that 3rd quarter, and especially because we knew that those grades could not go down moving forward. Those grades could not go down. So as a result of that, we decided to put that together, hold on to letter grades, and allow kids to report out what they truly did earn through 3rd quarter. We also have had a lot of conversations about synchronous learning experiences. And so just for everybody, what we're talking about with synchronous learning is really kids interacting with their classes in some sort of Zoom meeting or some sort of other platform, which we'll talk about in a second. And so we do allow those to occur, and they are happening at OPRF. But we aren't requiring all classes to meet in that platform for a number of reasons. There are a lot of questions surrounding the possibility in people's schedules and their lives for them to all be gathering during this exact time because of what's going on with Corona. And so as a result, this is something that is really an option at this point. And teachers are using both Google Meet for this platform and Zoom. And finally, I want to say that we have tech support available constantly throughout the week for our students, and Chris and his team have been incredibly flexible with that. All right, so with that said, as brief highlights of where we're going, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Fiorenza.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chris. So as you may know, ISB put within the guidelines 5 e-learning days school districts could take advantage of, which is a time for staff to engage in professional development, collaboration, an opportunity for them to just get some planning done. And so we took advantage of that first e-learning or remote learning planning day on April 9th. And this first one we structured a little bit for our staff because we knew there were some things we needed to have accomplished. And so as you can see, 2 of those things are, we asked the staff to reevaluate those priority standards for their courses for the remainder of the year, given this new learning experience. We know that everything a teacher intended to accomplish in the classroom from March until May isn't going to occur in the same way, at the same pace, and to the same depth through this e-learning experience as they would have in the classroom. And we felt like it was very, very important, as do the teachers, to make sure that where we targeted our learning and where we end, which is the next point, everybody identified that common endpoint, is critical to where we start next year. And so we are going to be passing along information from the current grade teacher to next year's teachers, so that there is a continuity of academic experiences for students. So we don't just start in a random place. We're going to very much make sure that we seal these gaps where they ended, what they experienced. We will make sure we take care of and give all of that information on to the next year's teacher. So they spent a lot of time doing that. That's all in Google Docs by department and division. And so that will make it easier to pass on to the next year's teachers. In addition to those 2 tasks for the day, then teachers were just able to share their lesson designs, to share, how they're approaching those educational experiences, and how technology was impacting the experience for students as well as for teachers. So teachers spent some time doing that. In addition, the technology department created an amazing self-paced professional learning opportunities. So teachers were able to engage in not only some reading about different opportunities and options, virtual and other platforms, they were actually able to create a lesson. We utilized the instructional coaches to support those learning experiences. Coaches worked with teachers. Teachers worked with other teachers to create these lessons and submit those things. We will be having another remote learning planning day tomorrow. Now this one is a little less structured because we feel like we've gotten started. Teachers really are doing a great job. They know exactly what they need to do, where they're starting. They have those priority standards down. And so tomorrow and any other e-learning planning days we have moving forward, those are strictly for teachers to work, collaborate, plan, and absolutely reach out to technology if they see the need. I just want to say that Faculty Senate, Dr. Pruitt-Adams, Greg, the rest of the leadership team, it has been very important to us to make sure teachers have enough time to collaborate, enough time to plan, work together. So these days are very sacred and very important to that leadership team on behalf of teachers. Yes, thank you. The next slide. That's fine. So we wanted to make sure that we monitored student engagement, got teachers' feedback about how students were engaging. So we sent out 2 surveys. The first survey that was sent out was 181 respondents. It was only sent to teachers, and teachers were asked a series of questions, and I pulled out the most, I think the most relevant and the most important of those. One was, how much time a week did teachers feel like they were spending, planning, and grading? And 69% of our teachers are spending 10 hours or more engaged in those activities. And I think that says a lot about our teachers. That's a lot of time dedicated to this. 92% of teachers are assigning work on average of 40 minutes or less per week. Not per week, the picture is in the way. Per day, sorry. And then last, 72% of our teachers are using a virtual platform at some point in their instruction. So those were really good indicators that we felt like teachers were doing the things that ISB had recommended, that instruction was 40 minutes or less per day, and that as the community has indicated, the use of a virtual platform is important to our students. And so again, the TLC, the technology team, has been very, very helpful in making sure that those platforms work, that if there's questions, that they are readily available to help our teachers navigate those issues. We then sent out a second survey. The purpose of that survey was really to just find out how students were engaging in the actual remote learning experience. And I felt that only one question was really relevant to sharing with you where things are. And I do want to be transparent. So 207 individuals responded. 80% indicated that students are engaging in the remote learning experience better than they had expected. But the transparent part I want to make sure you know is that that really is probably not the best question, because what teachers expected, they didn't expect to be doing remote learning in the first place. So really, it's hard for them to say, yeah, they're doing better than we expected. So I just want to be transparent that that's probably not the best designed question. But for what it's worth, teachers do think kids are engaging fairly well. That's my slide. Yes, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I have the attendance rates for the first 10 days of remote learning. So these are specifically the days that we receive state guidance to count attendance. And you can see for our average attendance by grade level, that kind of gives you an overall picture of where we're at as a school. Our attendance rate is showing up for those first 10 days as slightly better than our average attendance rate for our school year. And this kind of goes across our population and our subgroups. Again, I just want to reiterate that this is only for the 10 days. So obviously I realize that it's a small amount of numbers to start with. And I will speak to more in a little bit about how we're actually using our attendance data. So Chris, you can go to the next one. And so this next one is a couple more subgroups. This is our students indicated by special education status and our students indicated by their lunch status. The next way we sought some feedback was right when we got back from spring break, we did a survey to our students and our parents. And these are the themes that sort of arose from the survey, both in the questions as well as the open-ended questions that we received. Just some responses were more prevalent than others. So I did summarize those, and at the bottom is a link to the actual results of the survey. We have worked to utilize this information to shape our responses and our resources for the students and the school community. So the next, we're going to talk about student supports. I think it'll be myself at first, and then Linda Parker will jump in. So how are we actually using the data to help our students? So we are using our, we've leveraged our existing data from our early warning system data from Q3 to provide additional supports to students who have reached those risk thresholds, especially around failure rate. One item of note is that our current Q3 failure rate was lower compared to the past 2 years. This is encouraging as it gives more students a stronger chance to receiving that second semester credit. And we are also monitoring current levels of participation through a weekly attendance report. So what that can do is, so we have our Q3, how students attended and did on Q3, but with the new situation, this data will help us identify families that might be struggling in this current situation. And through some further analytics with that data, we've identified students whose participation rate, which unfortunately right now is the best source of engagement that we can find, is presenting a significant concern. So we've gone through a process working with a lot of our OPRF support service people that have an existing relationship with the students to assign them as a connect person and provide ongoing support and a friendly voice just to keep that connection alive. We're also going to be monitoring grades weekly, and I think next week another grade posting will happen, and we will re-engage that early warning system data to then see where we're at with that further.
And so tomorrow ends the mid-marking period, and we'll be able to pull grade data from our grade book and be able, as Kristen just mentioned, next week actually have different data to go and to support students with. The one thing to note that pupil supports are doing is that we're trying to manage attendance and engagement. So they tend to be different. As the kids check themselves in, we also have to make sure that they're engaging in the learning process with their teacher. What that's uncovered for us in student services is that our students are reacting to COVID-19 with a myriad of social and emotional concerns that have come out. They're feeling a little bit of helplessness in their, like, not being able to do anything that they are used to and things being cut off from them. So our counselors are trying to work daily in not only supporting the teachers to get students engaged, but also to make connections with the families by telephone. We noticed as well that the students are very inundated with emails. And so phone calls have been the best method that we've been using so far to connect with them and to motivate them to get activated in those classes. The seniors, without question, have been tagged to make sure that all of them know what their graduation requirements are and that they are working to make sure that they are passing those classes. So that there are no issues with their graduation. And then each between the social workers and the counselors are getting teacher referrals. And so daily they're working with them to make sure that the students are hearing from them as well as the teachers who have referred them. As Kristen mentioned, with our data that we are pulling, we are meeting as PSS teams to make sure that we are on top of who needs specific supports. And we have moved to identifying and looking at those kids who are of our most need to make sure that they are being taken care of and supported and feel supported, not only in getting the work done, but just that someone sees them and is going through this with them. Next slide, Chris. Thank you. So our social worker supports, they have actually just started back up their groups. They run groups within the school year to actually work with students who are having different identified issues through referrals from teachers and social workers. Those, and counselors. Those have started back up again, but those are specifically referred students for those in order to make sure that we were offering supports to all of our students. You may have seen a flyer that advertised our new chat platform, which is Quarantine. And this is just a tier 1 support that allows any student who wants to just get online to speak to a social worker about anything, peers. It's very light. It's not meant for any type of therapeutic work. It's just a way to build community and allow them to have a space to see one another when they can't physically be there with one another. And that's been going well. We also have social workers who have been producing podcasts individually that they then send out to their students to actually help to support them with the shelter in place. So they have different topics that they discuss, one of which was like a top 10 to mimic Letterman on how her new coworkers, which are her children, are actually comparing to her real coworkers at work. So kind of giving something for them to smile at as they are going through, and understanding that she understands and they understand just what they're going through as well in this shelter in place. They also, along with the deans, make the majority of the phone calls for the students who are chronically absent, initiating those contacts, making sure that parents are aware, but also that students are aware that we need you to check in, attend classes, and then get engaged in the work that's necessary. So we are making those calls as we would during the school, if we were in school as well. Next slide, Chris.
So in addition to all of those supports, the Academic Enrichment and Tutoring Center staff are also engaged in providing a number of supports to students. They are making those contacts to students to offer academic, executive functioning, and emotional support. The academic enrichment staff include Tia Campbell, who is our AE, or academic enrichment teacher, Susanna Lara, who is our in-school credit recovery teacher. We have two West 40 staff members who are part of a grant. They are specifically reaching out to students who are on their caseload for attendance reasons. And so they are reaching out to those students and families, offering those supports as well. And in addition, we also have included our testing center staff members, Tim Hasso, Seneca Johnson, and Anthony Lewis, as part of those academic enrichment staff members as well. And so all of them are making calls to students on a regular basis. We have utilized the third quarter F list to reach out to students, reach out to families, see if they need tutoring, if they need support, if they need EF help, if they need help organizing or setting a time schedule, or just someone to talk to. So those staff are doing that on a regular basis. In addition, they are, as I said, reaching out to parents. We also have our math tutors who are taking appointments. They are virtually tutoring students. They are working with the counselors to make sure that if there are students that need math tutoring, that they get those contacts and get the necessary tutoring that they need. Next slide, please.
And then if you have students at the school or in our community, you have looked at the remote learning page, our web page, you will now see that this document, the Coping with COVID-19, is listed there. Student Services, along with Kristen and myself, put this together to allow students who are having any one of these concerns that are going on. These were the top concerns that were listed by students in a survey that was done to say how their e-learning experience was going. These were the identified challenges that they were having. We took each of those challenges and then provided tips, strategies, and activities that they could do in order to overcome what they were feeling. And then also some resources that they could click through to actually get some real-time just support in that moment. And so that has been very helpful in order to offer just a immediate way of dealing with some of the issues that you see there. The last one being the challenge of the class of 2020. As you know, our seniors are kind of in a grief moment because they are missing what would have been the traditional end to their school year. And though we are working very hard to make sure that they feel celebrated and make sure that they know we're going to celebrate them in a big way, it's still kind of hard for them to do that. So we offered them some support there. Today also, we began our Thursdays with Student Services, which is just an online platform where I, a social worker, a counselor, and our wellness and prevention coordinator, we all just sit online and we wait for an hour to see who drops in to speak to us. If they have any questions, concerns, it's specifically for students and it's split up by grade level. So juniors and seniors were today, and we had a couple of seniors who came in and they just wanted to talk. And it was really nice to see that they were willing to share with all the adults there and give their suggestions on what they wanted to see happen for senior year celebrations, and just a chance to talk. Some of them just want a way to process what's going on, and they understand we can't make it better and that we're not doing this to them, but they just need an outlet to know that their school is supporting them. A big thing is they just feel as though they missed the opportunity to say goodbye to their teachers and all. So know that that's something that we're also thinking about to see what we could do for them in that area as well. And Dr. Dixon will come in at this time to do her special education services.
Okay, within the field of special education, the federal government has not lifted any of the requirements for us in special education. So with that being said, we still have to continue to provide all of the services to students as if we were still at school. So one of the things that teachers have been doing is case management. That's something that they do during the school year. Teachers are continuing to do case management virtually. And what that looks like is each teacher in the department is assigned a caseload in addition to their teaching duties. So their responsibility is to follow up with the teachers in the students' classrooms to see how students are doing, to see if teachers have any questions about the accommodations that they have been provided with via the student's snapshot, which is a small portion of the student's IEP that outlines all of the accommodations that students have. So on that case management side, that's what teachers have been doing. They still have been moving forward with their duties as case managers. Related services. Within our related service department, we have school psychologists, social workers, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and music therapists as well. And so again, as the federal government has said that you are still charged to move forward with these services for students because it's just the right thing to do. We are continuing to move forward with related services via Google Classroom and also via Google Hangouts. And so what that looks like is the service providers have scheduled times with the students, with teachers, with teacher assistants. They post different activities for the students in Google Classroom that are often very parent friendly as well to help support the work that students can do at home. In addition to that, the providers are actually live in Google Hangouts. And again, they've scheduled times with students. And in the Google Hangouts, they are still working on the students' IEP goals as much as they possibly can. In some areas, all of the goals may not be able to be worked on. And that's the one area that the federal government has said that if it is something that requires a physical touch where the person has to physically be there, then there are ways that we address that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on our legal slide. But the providers are still following up with students. Weekly activities are planned based upon the students' IEP needs. Staff members are required to take attendance. We do that because we want to make sure that we are in compliance with federal and state regulations. We want to make certain that we are able to do diligence and show that we are still providing those services with fidelity. Paraprofessionals are also supporting their individual students assigned to Google Meets. We have our paraprofessionals. We went through a training with them. And so our expectation for them is to support students in that way. Something else that we are also asking our paraprofessionals to do, we have set up a portal so that paraprofessionals can send all of their contact that they have with students, all of their contact that they have with teachers and parents to a dedicated portal so that again, we can show that we are in compliance, we are meeting the needs of students, and we are very well aware of what our responsibility is. As I mentioned as I began speaking, as far as the laws are concerned and with special education, when we have snow days, the day looks a little bit different. If we were closed because it was a snow day, we would not still be charged to run IEP meetings during the day. It's a little bit different for us. So what Dr. Qualls and I have been doing, we have been attending weekly webinars regarding supporting students with IEPs during remote learning from a curricular perspective and legal perspective. The reason why these webinars are so important is that although we have a body of laws that don't change regarding special education, now that we are providing services for students remotely, there are things within the law that we need to talk about and how we're going to deliver these things. Is it possible? What are the best ways for us to do it? And when we are in instances where we just can't because the students are not physically there, we are provided with different legal steps that we are to take to ensure that the district still remains in compliance during this remote learning period. Once we have participated in the webinars, and also we also have a lot of phone calls with our attorneys as well, more one-on-one kinds of phone calls, because as we receive this information, again, we just want to make sure that we are implementing it correctly. Once we finish with this level of training for ourselves, we do hold meetings with our staff members. We make them aware of the mandates through our weekly meetings to ensure that IEP services and staffings continue to take place as outlined in ISB guidelines. And then the last thing that I do need to mention, it's critically important that our secretarial staff is working very hard to make certain that all of the paperwork that we need for these meetings are prepped, that whatever contact we need with the parents in terms of sending things out and receiving things back and making certain that we're keeping very good records of when things are sent, when things are returned. They're working very, very hard. And so I wanted to make certain that I mentioned that as well, because they are definitely a critical part of our department.
That really concludes what we wanted to share. So I think now we can turn it open it up to questions.
Questions?
I have a question. Can you guys hear me okay? Because I've been having mic issues. Okay. Yes. So in the survey that you had, I can't remember, but where the teachers had been surveyed, and it indicated that 72% reported using a virtual platform. How are the teachers not using a virtual platform engaging with the students?
Some of them are using a auditory platform. So some of them record things. They use Google Classroom, which doesn't require them to virtually be there for kids, but they can post assignments, they can give feedback, kids can ask questions.
Okay, the virtual platform is referring to like a video platform. Is that accurate in this context?
I want to make sure I heard your question. Are you saying, did you say that it's virtual means like visual? I can see you.
Is that how you mean it here?
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question, if I may.
Go ahead.
And this is, you know, maybe a short answer now and longer later, and as an ongoing process. Because this is so new and it's kind of, you know, came out of the blue, I think surveying is so important, and I just would really be interested to know the process of what you're doing to maximize the effectiveness of the surveys, of the design of the questions, of getting a high response rate, all those things, because it's you know, it's so new, and I appreciate. I think Dr. Fiorenza, you acknowledged where there's one question that was, okay, you know, what was expectation? This wasn't really expected at all. So again, not necessarily to hold feet to the fire now, but I'm really interested to know best practices that you're trying to explore and be a thought leader, you know, within the realm of education on that, because I think it is so important, and to get as best quality as possible, so we're not just kind of having people do it in a blasé way, whether it's teachers or students. And so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll speak to that just a little bit. Survey number 1, while the response rate was a little bit less than we would have liked, I do think that it came very quickly after I believe it was right after spring break, I gave the first survey. I think the questions were very good. They were well put together. I got a lot of written feedback versus percentages that I could give you. So, right, more qualitative than quantitative data. I do think that I could have had a better response rate had I waited a little bit longer. I believe our teachers were still a little bit in like this shocked, oh my goodness phase. I'm at home with my kids trying to navigate work, trying to reach out to my students and plan for, at that point, what we thought was just, you know, a couple of weeks and that we would be back after spring break. So I don't know at that point how invested people were in a survey, because they were really thinking this was short term. The second survey I did was recently, probably within the last week and a half, 2 weeks. I absolutely have to just own that what I was trying to ask people was, how were kids engaging? Agreed, my question wasn't well worded and I didn't catch it until I got the responses back, and then kind of thought, maybe this doesn't exactly match what I really wanted to know, which is, do they think kids are engaging well, or do they have concerns? I hear your point, and moving forward, I will definitely do my due diligence into ensuring that the surveys ask really good questions and give us the data that we need, which is, we want to know how our teachers are faring, and we want to know our kids receiving academic instruction in a way that's meeting their needs. So I hear your point. I receive it, and there'll be good surveys moving forward.
Yeah, and I just want you to know that mostly what I was saying was just appreciation for the fact that you're doing it, and that you're thoughtful about it. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I appreciate, you know, in the presentation you talked about the use of the PD time. I'd be interested in hearing, and I realize this is also new, what opportunity or exists to really go outside of the district in terms of emerging best practices in this area.
So again, I'll speak to just a few pieces of that. So really, we wanted to really make a clear distinction between professional learning days and e-planning days. And so while we provided some self-paced technology professional learning, those 5 days really are going to be given to teachers to just get through what they need to make sure that the instruction is quality, assessments are quality, that we are pacing appropriately, that they have time to collaborate. I have had the instructional coaches working with Lisa Westman, who is, she's a consultant in the area of differentiation. So those teachers have spent about 6 hours now and 2 individual coaching sessions, one-on-one, with Ms. Westman, not only to help us navigate our remote learning experience, but also because we are going to start school in some fashion in the fall. And I wanted to make sure that we were ready to support people in the area of differentiation. Outside of that, I really haven't done a lot to look outside of the district. Just to be very transparent and honest, our teachers are doing everything they can do right now to navigate both teaching in this different platform, the grief that they have about not seeing students, the grief they have about what's happening in our society and in our country, and then the grief that they're receiving in the conversations that they are having with students. Some of our students are struggling and they're reaching out and talking to teachers, and that weighs really heavy on the emotions of our teachers. So I just wanted to be respectful to just allow teachers space to get through this. Our plan is in August, or when we return in a more holistic fashion, that we will sit down with our teachers, we will debrief, we will talk about what went well and what they struggled with, and we will use the what they struggled with to craft PD, so that just as virtual and remote learners, we can get better at those pieces. So that's kind of the plan moving forward.
You know, I just want to add just one tiny piece into that. I want to double down on everything Laura just said, and also point out that as far as how we are going about the process of interpreting the various stages of state guidelines that we have received and anticipating how they might affect our students moving forward, we have been incredibly collaborative with districts around us, throughout the state as well. Probably there's been this huge spike of relying on our network outside of the district to help us kind of navigate this from that perspective. So while that hasn't, taken the form, Tom, of a full-fledged PD, it certainly has meant that we are looking outside of the district to help figure out how we're going to navigate the immediate needs. And just like Lori said, long-term PD needs and how we're going to go about that. We're actually learning so much more right now than we possibly could have learned in any other regular environment to help us guide our choice for PD moving forward.
Thank you.
I had a question. First of all, thank you. And Lori, I appreciate and I'm glad that you brought in just the grief aspect of this situation for everyone. And it is not working from home. It's not a snow day. It's, it is something none of us have ever experienced. And my question is, I guess, more about just looking at Maslow's hierarchy, just the immediate needs of our, students and staff. Are we, our surveys or our outreach, are we sure that, and you can't be sure, but how do we know that our kids are okay, or the ones that aren't? And I think about, school is a safe space for a lot of kids, and the surveys that were done reached a portion, but in terms of understanding the racial equity and being concerned, seeing the engagement or the attendance rates of the our Black students at 80, I think it was 89%, being so much lower than the other groups. I just wonder how we understand what is at the root of that. And, do all our kids have food, and do they have the internet connections? Do all of our paraprofessionals, all of our teachers? I mean, it's just trying to understand what could be driving some of the lack of engagement from just I guess, a humanistic standpoint.
So Jackie, I can talk a little bit about what we're trying to do along those lines with the limited information we're able to have with the participation rate. That was when Linda and I talked a lot. That was probably the biggest driving force why we chose to take. So what we ended up doing is working with Alexis, who's the new MTSS coordinator, and the PSS teams. And then all the support through special ed, through all the different levels of support, is try to find that group of students who are least engaged. So who are below a threshold that really is presenting a significant concern of saying, like, what might be going on, and trying to get a person who has an existing relationship with them to be assigned to them as their check and connect person, to be reaching out at least twice a week. And not to say, hey, where are you? Why aren't you doing your work? But to try to understand why you're not engaging, and is it because there's a significant source of stress that might be external to school? And that's why we really wanted to hone in on that existing relationship, because we really, that's the question, that's the big question. That's really hard to get at from behind a computer. So, so that's why we use the data in that way. So yeah, we did show you some averages of the data, but I want you to make sure you know that there was a lot more analysis that went on, all the way down to, like, okay, this, where, what do we consider concerning right now? And then it'll be weekly. We're going to be doing that data run weekly, and then updating the data and hopefully seeing some good trajectory, but also catching other kids who might be going down that didn't present the first time we ran the data. And then in addition, those D and F lists, and then the early warning system, trying to marry those to then create a better picture of how attendance is affecting engagement, or how attendance may not be indicating low engagement. So you might have high attendance rate, but low engagement, right? And that's sort of this really tough data to get at right now, sitting from home. So that is the way we are using the data to get at exactly the question you just posed.
And I also want to add for you that in the cases where we have discovered that, for example, one of my counselors wrote me after the food had been sent out that a family didn't get one, and we went all the way to speaking to Mike at the lunchroom to see if we could open back up to make sure that they got something to eat, and they did. Mike was great. The support teams that we have, like with the food service and also with tech, because anytime we find out someone doesn't have a hotspot, we organize to make sure that they can come up and get a hotspot. And our tech team has been extraordinary in making sure that if a device is broken, if a device doesn't have a hotspot or there's no internet access, there have been ways for us to get that for the student and into their hands even during this time. So we have been uncovering those situations and we've been meeting those needs. One thing to know across the board is that even parents need help with just the motivation factor. The students are trying to build up their why. Why am I doing this? And just trying to stay motivated in the process. And so that is a big thing that we're trying to cue into. And as Kristen just said, not just say, do the work, do the work, do the work, but let's talk you through what you're going through so that we can get you to seeing how you can get back engaged with this work.
Thank you.
I might also like to speak to the staff, because I do think it's important that you know that we have been checking in on our teachers because they matter. They are the direct link to our kids, and so their emotional well-being is incredibly important. So a few things that have been occurring is, I know Linda Parker and myself have sent out a number of emails just, saying, hey, happy Tuesday, the sun is out, we miss you, are you okay? The African-American staff at Oak Park River Forest High School was organized by Miss Lenice Lush. We meet weekly for an hour virtually and we just check in. It's just like, hey, how's everybody doing? When I hear somebody isn't doing well, I'm calling them individually on the phone, talking to them, shooting emails. So I do think, and I just want to make sure that we are checking as best we can on our teachers. Obviously, some people are just very private and they're having a hard time getting through this. Our administrative staff, Dr. Pruitt Adams, at our last administrative meeting, allowed every single person to have a moment in our virtual meeting to just share how they're feeling, how's their experience going. And people spoke very openly and in a very authentic fashion about what they're experiencing, maybe their stress level. And then from there, people have said, like, hey, I live alone. I just need somebody to check in on me. And so those texts and those relationships are continuing. So I just want to make sure that you are aware we care about our teachers a lot.
And it was never any question. I am grateful with just understanding and hoping that part of the reason I wanted us to be able to have this update is because it flies in the face in a lot of respects to the whole intent of internet and remote learning as it was first prescribed. Even a few months ago when we were talking about what e-learning would look like. And in the face of the stressors, I just hope that the message to that from a board standpoint, that it is, a daunting daily upheaval and everyone is appreciated and we will learn from this, but at the same time, it is not as simple as saying working from home. So I just want us to continue to think of it in that way. Gina, you had a comment, question?
And thank you for that acknowledgement. That's great.
Yes.
That's special.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, my question, thank you, Jackie. My question was, it was somewhat of a question, but it's kind of to what Tom was asking. and you all have answered it actually. I knew that you were already doing this. As an educator who's currently going through the same process as you all are going through, I just want to first of all say thank you so much, because the challenges are really so real. The idea of the emerging, what we're learning in this emerging pedagogy, what's true about that is that you're creating it and your staff is creating it right now. The faculty is creating what it means to do this type of work in this way. So the most cutting edge things that I've seen have come from the people that are already in the buildings. There's no outside expert on how to do this because we've never done this before. Even schools, even home schools that do it online, they've never done this before. So I just wanted to acknowledge all of your efforts and all of the efforts of the staff, the faculty, the building, the grounds, like every single person who's been involved in your processes and all of you as an administrative team, because the challenge is real to have, fortunately I'm at home by myself, or unfortunately, but for all of you who have families that you're operating around, trying to teach lessons. And, I'm in continual meetings all day and working with teachers, and I've witnessed what you all are doing, right? Because I'm doing it. So I just know that the care that you're taking with the people.
We lost you, Gina. Can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
But I still want to thank you for acknowledging that.
Thank you for creating the future, because that's what you're doing. Like you're creating it now. Like there's no manual for this. You're creating it right now. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments, questions?
I just had one quick comment, and I hope it's not too much out of turn, but I just wanted to mention that for those families who are not able to physically travel to our school, because we've got grandparents raising children as we talk about equity issues within our district, for those families who are unable to make it to school to receive the food, Latanya Jackson, our parent outreach person, has been driving to the homes of these families and delivering the food that we've been providing. And she's also been assisting us for those students, as Lori and Linda mentioned, for those students who needed hotspots and where we were experiencing some issues, and tech has been great. For those parents who have not been able to physically come up to the school because they don't have transportation or the means to do that, Latanya has also been out in the community delivering those things as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because it's been very helpful for us in the SPED department.
Thank you. I'm glad that you did that because it is important. And I don't want to belabor, but I do just want to say that in terms of equity and in terms of diversity, our little community of Oak Park and River Forest, that 5 square miles of Oak Park, and I'm not quite sure the size of River Forest, but to be able to, meet the needs of such a diverse population and be aware as a community that we have everything from, families with no internet and no transportation to those who every kid in the family may have their own room and laptop. So, and not to say that there aren't stressors there as well, but trying to, that's differentiation, I think, at a whole nother level. And I think our community just needs to be mindful of everyone's going through this together. So.
If I might just say just one thing. Am I on? Okay, yes. I just want to also say that as a superintendent, I could not be more prouder than to work for the group of administrators, to work with them. Cabinet, all the directors, you've heard them today, and the division heads and the teachers who have all just kind of rallied in this time of uncertainty, in this time of fear, for lack of a better word. And they rise to the occasion every single day. And it makes me proud to be a part of that team. So I just wanted to say thank you, because they are doing a yeoman's job.
Okay.
Okay, you guys could, Greg, except for you, Greg, your team.
That's always the story, Greg.
Always a story.
Thanks to you all, and thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, very much.
Good night, everyone.
Too early tomorrow morning. We have an early meeting, okay? No. I'm just
So I'll move on to the next item, which is the compensation of essentials employees during mandated school closure. As you know, this information was presented to the board, and during the March board meeting, the administration made a recommendation to the board for essential personnel who had to come into the building to complete tasks, that we pay them additional wages in the terms of time and a half when they are in the building. So we wanted to take an opportunity to kind of define what essential employees are and what does that mean when they come into the building. And so for buildings and grounds, as you see in the presentation, what we have on staff and why we need to have them. In the document you have for campus safety as well, and food service. The MOA that came forward to the board was a commitment to pay SEIU employees for hours worked on site at time and a half. And while we know food service employees are not SEIU, the district plan, the request was to pay them as well time and a half. This extra compensation was for essential employees. So wanted to just talk about, we have food service who comes in once a week on Mondays, and they prepare meals for not only D200, they prepare meals for D97 and D90 as well. Safety and security, we have 2 people on site during the day. I'm pulling from memory, I think 1 in the evening, or maybe 2 in the evening. The ones that we have there, and then we have the contractual service that we've always had at night. The 2 in the day, 1 is at the Welcome Center, so when teachers need to come in to get things out of their office that help to supply students during their work. And the same one at the Welcome Center is there when students bring their devices in, either they're broken or to trade out. And we also house the device center for D90. And so we don't fix their computers, but that's where their families can drop them off for repair and pick them up. The second person is walking through the building, checking the perimeter versus internally, and then going outside on a daily basis. We are running students and adults off the fields, just trying to keep them safe. We've additionally a couple of times run some homeless people off who are on the property who really shouldn't be there. Buildings and grounds, we have 1 custodian who during the day actually cleans up on Mondays. He comes in and cleans where food service has been, and then cleans the other places where people have also been. We have mail. So we have the mail person who comes in and does the mail on Wednesdays. That allows us to make sure that bills get paid as we get, and invoices get paid that come in. The business office has a staggered process to make sure that payroll is met and bills are met at the same time. So they come in on a scheduled basis, and as well as IT in order to service the technology. So those are the essential employees. But I do want to say that, and I said it in the memo, that all of our employees are essential. Our teachers and our support staff and our counselors and social workers every day are working with students. They're working remotely. But the fact that we have individuals who come in a time when they're told to shelter in, we felt it was important that if they were coming in, that they should be compensated for that. So we open the table now for discussion with the board. Oh, I do want to add that the amount of overtime fluctuates from one pay period to the next, depending on the need. In March, we also had the annual that we would do over spring break, resurfacing the electricity. We had the new phones put in, and so that caused us some overtime in March. We're open for discussion.
I have a question.
Sure.
And it relates to the discussion we had earlier about Project One, somewhat, which is as we look to leverage the building being closed and do work in the building, how does this intersect with that work?
I don't, because of the construction. I'm going to ask Mike to chime in. We have our regular people who will be there, who are currently there now. I'm not sure how many more, if you're asking like B&G, how many more people will be in the building. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking with regards to construction. With food service, it's on Mondays. I don't think there'll be an issue with that at all. And I don't think there'll be an issue right now with safety and security. Whenever we roll out our plan, which we're working on with regards to teachers picking up their things and students picking up their things, there may be a cause then for additional presence of safety and security if we have students pick up their items. It may be a call for additional B&G if we decide to clean out student lockers ourselves. We're still finalizing that plan. Mike, with regards to construction, do you want to add anything?
Yes, primarily it's just Jeff Bergman who's here. Jeff Bergman is the director of construction, and he's the one here. It's working with the various contractors, working with Pepper and the various contractors that are on site. In addition, the engineers are some of those essential employees, so they interface with the existing building operations and construction. So if something needs to get shut down or, basically we have some staff, but it's not additional staff. As Dr. Pruitt-Adams mentioned, however, as we move to do things like for seniors, get them their personal belongings. We're planning actually not to do our summer construction. We're looking at postponing that, given what might be happening when school is opening till after the end of the school year. Hopefully some of these social distancing constraints will be loosened at that point. So to answer your question, Tom, I don't see a whole lot of intersection between the summer construction and the staff that we're talking about here.
Jalen, at what point do we unwind this? How long does this go on?
This the way it's written is there's an end date of June 30th. Are you talking about the MOA, June 30th is the end point. And we sent that out to the board when we went back and changed the language as directed by the board. We sent a note to the board that we felt it prudent to say specifically June 30th. That's the end of the school year, so that this would not go on into perpetuity in case we didn't start school in the fall and things continue through the summer. And so it ends June 30th. After June 30th, beginning July 1, the staff would just get their regular rate of pay. I can't understand you.
I just can't tell if I was acknowledged or not, so. Okay, well, I'm going. The people that are coming in, how many meals did you say that they're providing a week?
As of what they do is they prepare 7 days of meals for breakfast and 7 days of meal for lunch. And they provide that for D97. I don't have those numbers exactly in front of me, but as of last week, they have prepared over 46,500 meals.
Wow. And I'm imagining that the social distancing and you guys, that they have all of the equipment and all of the PPE and all of those things to be able to do this.
You are vibrating.
I'm sure.
I couldn't
My
understand.
comment really is about the fact that I have a poor internet connection. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Is it better?
Yes.
Okay, my internet is, I see it keeps telling me it's unstable. It only happens on this computer. The folks that are coming in to do this work, they're still having to go home to their families and put them at risk and be out in the world. And it's just, I don't know, I guess my comment is that I really commend those folks and I really appreciate this move by the administration to support them in continuing to do the work to make sure that so many things that need to get done. The building and grounds for being there, the security for making sure that people are safe when they could be at home with their families and not being out, being exposed continually to the possibility of having this, so, or, you know, of acquiring that. So I just really support this and thank the administration for recognizing what it means for them to go out into the world and continue to show up and do this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you. We started this last month, and I appreciate the additional information from your staff, Dr. Pruitt-Adams.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next item is for a student trip update. The board should have received, whenever I send a communication out to families, the board should have received that. And that would have been for the Italy trip and the France trip. Since that time, we've started working on Japan, Tanzania, and Yellowstone. We're still in the process of working with the companies on those. I don't know if you have any questions on what you've been sent. I will say this, that we've had legal inquiries, and we've reached out to legal for insight on all the contracts of the companies we've worked with, as well as Click. Do you have any questions of me?
Joylene, this is Craig. What are you thinking, or, you know, you have to work through all of these, but are you considering changing how this is done in the future?
I think it definitely needs to be changed into how it's done. There needs to be more consistency in processes, and right now it's really not. There are various agencies, and I don't know the criteria for how agencies are chosen. There's been different forms of payment. Sometimes people pay through RevTrak, but they do the agreement, the parents do the agreement with the company. Sometimes they just go straight to the company and the money goes to the company. There's no formal contracts with the district unless it's a class. The Tanzania trip is a class. And so students actually meet on Sunday, and they've continued to meet remotely on Sundays. And then there's a summer component to that. And Yellowstone is a class. And there's a study component on the weekends for that, and a summer school component. The other exchange trips, the sponsors work those out with the travel agent and with the other schools. And so we do realize as a district, there has to be some systems in place and some type of formal contractual agreement that everybody sees, and then looking at the level of approvals. really reviewing the levels of approvals on those trips.
So given all the inconsistency here, and also given, you know, what CPS has said, do we have, and I didn't see in the Italy memo, do we have a position on, you know, what we're planning to do or what we're not planning to do?
So we reached out to, on the Italy trip, we reached out to Click first to see if we could actually file a claim ourselves, and with Click. And so Click said they don't carry travel insurance. The district, whenever there's a trip taken, the students pay $35 to the district for liability insurance, which doesn't cover travel. When we talk to the travel agencies, and this is where we got legal input, in some instances, the parents had the opportunity when they registered with the company, such as the Italy trip, to take additional insurance. One student did. The others took the basic. Initially, the people with the Italy trip told us they were not giving, they would move us up to comprehensive, and the families would lose $1,000 on one thing and then $400 on something else. And then once France, once the country said we couldn't travel there, and the people in Italy said their kids couldn't come here, then I got involved and our attorneys got involved, and we worked with ACES. And so ACES finally said that they would honor everything, because at first they told us they couldn't give us hardly anything back, because they couldn't recoup their monies from the hotel. They couldn't get the airfare back. And so they gave everything back to the parents except for the $1,000 cancellation fee, which the parents all signed the form. They sent them the form, the parents all signed the form. Today was the email you got was the first where the parents reiterated asking us. I had not heard from the parents since they signed off on the last form until today. But as you see in the email he sent, I've been working with them myself personally. With the France trip, France actually, the country of France actually canceled the trip the day the flight was supposed to take off. We had, and I do want to say we had never put anything in writing. They kept asking me to put a statement in writing that we would cancel. I said I would not put anything in writing. Initially, the company, Foreign Exchange, for the France trip told us they weren't giving anything. It was their policy to never give any money back. And then at one point they said, okay, they'd give us $400 back per person for the incidentals. And so we once again looked at their contract, and we reached out to see if we could file a claim and then sell those seats maybe for someone else on another trip. We were told no, that there could be a rollover, but they had to know who the student was, who was rolling over to. So we went round and round with them, and then finally they said, okay, we will file a claim on behalf of the district. And so Jennifer Smith and I got on the phone with them, and I said, I need to know everything that you're sending our parents if you're filing a claim. Well, they didn't send it to me. They went straight to the parents, which caused some more confusion, because they told us that the agreement was not with the district, the agreement was with the parents. We shared that with the parents, that the company had said we could not file a claim. Now on that one, they actually paid the money to the district through RevTrack, and then the district paid the travel agency, but the parents went online and registered, and they told me, they told legal, the agreement was not with us, we could not file a claim on behalf of them, that they had to settle with the parents. And so they then sent each of the parents a claim form. As of today, I got the notice from Miranda that all the parents on the France trip had turned in their claim forms to get their monies back. They were going to try to expedite that. Now there is money due from us. The $35 fee that we charge for liability insurance is due to all of the trips. And then the teachers had, the sponsors had collected like fees for incidentals. And so we owe that money back as well. And Susan is working with finance to make sure that the parents get those monies back. The Tanzania trip, we're just notifying those parents today that that trip was canceled. It was canceled by the company. And Tuesday, I was in a conference call with the owners of that company, along with Jennifer Smith and Susan, trying to see, because what they offered as a refund when they canceled, we did not agree with, because they canceled and then they wanted to charge all these different fees and for cancellation, and we told them that was not acceptable. We met with them Tuesday via a Zoom meeting, and so they told us they would reach out. They heard us. They're a small business, they said, trying to stay in business, and I told them, well, I'm a business trying to take care of my families. And so they said they would follow up with us. I did get a response from them late this evening, but I haven't had a chance to go through it. Yellowstone is
So I think all of that, I understand. I think it just kind of goes to the point that from a district, we really need to have a consistent way to do it, because you shouldn't be spending all this time negotiating. I understand that we have to, but that's, we need a different process.
We do. We need a different process.
And I will just say that, you know, this is one of those situations that you don't know what will be. You know, this was a crisis situation and it revealed other information. And so I think that everything that I've heard so far is that that is the path moving forward, and trying to convey to our, you know, we're not withholding anything from our families, but that there has been a lot of work put into to work towards getting the reimbursements. And Craig, does that answer your question? Because you referenced CPS.
Well, you know,
Yeah,
I understand we're trying to do everything we can for the students. And my question really is, you know, at a board level, should we be considering, should we be making these students whole for these trips across the board? I know we're trying to get every dime out that we can on an individual negotiation, but it,
so I can't even tell you. I know what the Italy trip parents, they did not get $1,000 back. I know that. The China trip was $300. I think the Japan trip is $300. The one with France, they filed a claim. They may get 100% back. I don't know that until, because the parents, the last two parents just signed their forms today. So I don't, to make a recommendation right now on who to make whole, the letter that the board got last week was asking the board to make them whole, and then we get the money from the company. When the company has told us the agreement is not with us, they will not pay us. And I can't come to the board at this point in time with a recommendation to make them whole without being able to do that. And so what I do know, if we decided to make them whole on everything that's been spent and not know what they're getting back, it would cost $106,000. That's if we made them whole across the board. Some of these trips are very expensive.
I have a question. Do you, so are you saying that you don't have all the information for everyone who needs to be made whole yet, and that that you're asking that we wait to make that decision about making people whole until we know all of the facts?
I think that would determine that we have been advised, I'm just going to be honest, based upon the contractual agreements for the companies by our legal counsel, that we should not at this point in time. I don't know what the France trip is going to get back, because that was the company that initially said they don't do refunds at all. but now they filed the claim. So I don't have anything to come to you unless I come to you on each individual case. I don't have that right now.
Gina, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me or you can't hear Gina?
Can't hear Gina. I don't know if you can hear her.
No.
Yeah, she's broken up.
Ah.
Gina, we couldn't hear anything you just said. Could I just make a suggestion that, given the last information that Dr. Pruitt-Adams just stated about waiting to have more information before a recommendation can come forward, that we get that before we pursue a request of the administration about reimbursements, because some people may be reimbursed by that time.
Mm-hmm. They may be it may be reimbursed 100%. I don't know that.
Yeah, I guess my question and where I was leading was, I understand where we are, but I think at some point we ought to have a summary of what happened and where we are, and as a board make a decision if there's something that we want to do here, but or not.
That is the plan.
Okay, and I understand it's going to take a while to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just encourage everyone. There have been a lot of emails and updates, but there have been regular updates about kind of what is transpiring here. So let's just make sure we stay on top of it too, because I feel like we're way in the weeds right now.
Can I just ask one quick question that I don't even want an answer to? I just want to suggest it to Dr. Pruitt-Adams. I would just double check that we even are allowed to reimburse for some if the parents contracted directly with travel agents or with airlines. I mean, we are stewards of public funds, so I would suggest just double checking with our attorneys if that's something we actually even could do, if that's where we think we're going.
That's what I was saying. We've had legal involved the entire time. And every time a trip is canceled, I request the cancellation fee, the cancellation notice and all that. Legal has said that we should not reimburse based upon the contract, because the registration contracts are between the parents and the agency. And that's what has a lot of the parents upset, because legal has advised us not to, and CLIC said they would not.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I thought that legal was advising us not to until we had more information, but it sounds like.
No, legal has advised us not to reimburse.
Okay. Hi. Can I just give a 20-second chime in here? Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
First, I just want to thank you, Superintendent Pruitt-Adams. You're doing way above and beyond, and it's extraordinary circumstances, but you're stepping up extraordinarily, and your staff who's helping you, so thank you. And to the families who are dealing with this, I'm sorry that this is happening and that they're getting the runaround, not from us, but from this, whatever, the universe right now. I would ask that at some point, not now, of course, we know what kind of legal expenses have we incurred so far in relation to the counsel we're getting, and then also what is the basis for the advising that we not do any, making whole of these families, just to understand, so that we can understand a little more clearly where that's coming from. Because so anyway, and I know it won't be resolved overnight. So.
And it's based on each different contract, but yes.
So yeah, thank you for dealing with this crazy quilt scenario.
That's all I have.
All right, thank you.
We have some more action items now.
Yes, we do. We are at the election of the Board of Education officers beginning May 2020 for one-year terms. Sorry, I was muted. So we have nominations are now in order for the office of president for a one-year term beginning May 1st, 2020. And is there any, we can go straight into the nominations. I have tried to speak with everyone about this. Feels like it kind of snuck up on us, given that we don't necessarily know what day or month it is. Is there any need for discussion of what the roles entail, or people ready to nominate, or how do you want to proceed?
Jackie, this is me, Craig. I would nominate Sarah for president of the board.
I would second that nomination. This is Ralph.
Okay, are there any other nominations for president?
I nominate Jackie.
Okay, who was that?
Tom.
Tom Kofsky.
And I second that motion or nomination.
I will say that I respectfully withdraw my name from the nomination, as the 2 years I have served, and I do feel that transition now is in order. But thank you. Are there any other nominations? So I'm following the script here. Please bear with me. Sarah Spivey is, and Jackie Moore were nominated. Jackie Moore recused. Hearing no further nominations, I declare the nominations for president are closed. And if there's only one nomination, technically, yes, there is. For the office of president, the chair hereby declares that Sarah Spivey is elected by acclamation and directs the secretary to so record in the minutes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Does Sarah take over now?
Yes.
So Jackie, I just want to thank you for your leadership over the past several years. You have been the leader we needed in extraordinary times. I'm very glad you're not actually leaving the board, because then I'd be crying right now. So that's good. But you really did a fantastic job, whether it was from America to Me and all of that fanfare. And then last year we had difficulties, and now we have yet more unprecedented difficulties. I think you've handled that all with grace and dignity and a true vision for our school. So thank you.
Hear, 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 hear.
Thank you very much. And I'm also glad that this is not a swan song, but just a different role. So I appreciate that. And now, I really don't know, does this mean that I continue to do this, or does Sarah do this? Gail?
Because she's not taking the role right this moment.
Okay, I don't want to step on any toes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we have the nominations for the office of vice president.
This is Martiri. I would like to nominate Craig Aselli for vice president.
I'll second that one.
Are there any other nominations for vice president? Okay. Please forgive me. Craig Isley being the only candidate nominated for the office of vice president, the chair hereby declares Mr. Isley is elected by acclamation and directs the secretary to so record in the minutes. And now nominations for secretary.
Nominate Ralph Martiri for secretary.
And
I'll second that motion if that's okay.
And I would like to nominate Tom Kofsky.
Am I allowed to second that too? I feel like I'm in a seconding mood.
I'll second that as a nomination.
Oh,
Tom, are you interested in being secretary?
Certainly.
I then withdraw my nomination.
Well, we are very pleasant. I appreciate that. Okay, so hearing no further nominations, I declare the nominations closed, and Tom Kofsky, being the only candidate nominated for the office of secretary, the chair hereby declares Mr. Kofsky elected by acclamation and directs the secretary to so record in the minutes. So we have our new officers. Congratulations. And thus concludes.
That's everyone.
So move for future agenda items. Can we just wait? Move to adjourn.
You have to adopt the board meeting date.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so sorry. Move to adopt the Board of Education regular meeting dates for 2020-2021 school year.
I'll second.
Second.
Is this a voice vote? No, this is action.
Yeah, okay. Let me do that. And Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Mr. Isley,
Yes.
Ms. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Kofsky,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Martiri,
Yes.
Dr. Moore.
Yes.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Well,
Thank
Stay
you all.
safe.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.